The metallic tang of fear filled my mouth as my sister stood there, clutching my vital insulin vials precariously over the cold, unforgiving porcelain sink. A cruel, knowing smirk played on her lips as she coolly announced, "If I can't have diabetes, then neither can you." The words hung heavy in the air, a chilling declaration of intent that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. When I, breathless and desperate, pleaded with her, begging her to stop this escalating nightmare, she merely let out a mocking laugh. "You're sweating already," she taunted, her eyes glinting with malicious triumph. "What's that? 400? How long until your organs begin their irreversible descent into failure, shutting down one by one?" I was paralyzed, unable to utter a single word, my mind racing through the horrific possibilities. That terrifying encounter took place just 9 days ago. This very morning, the tables had turned, and it was her turn to weep, her face streaked with tears, as the prosecutor meticulously read the damning charges aloud in the stark, unforgiving courtroom. It makes one wonder, doesn't it, what's the absolute worst, most deeply hurtful thing your own sister has ever done to you, something that truly left an indelible mark? My sister, Jade, had meticulously orchestrated an elaborate deception, pretending to suffer from diabetes herself, all because she festered with an intense, burning jealousy over the profound attention my genuine condition garnered from our parents. Jade, who was 5 years my senior, seemed to view my type 1 diabetes not as a medical reality, but as a personal affront, a direct insult to her own existence. Her insidious tactics began subtly. She'd cunningly hide my glucose meter just before meal times, leaving me scrambling and anxious, unable to properly dose my insulin. She'd brazenly pilfer my juice boxes, specifically reserved for the frightening drops in blood sugar that could spell danger. And, most damagingly, she'd whisper insidious tales to our unsuspecting parents, asserting that I was merely feigning symptoms, manipulating my medical condition purely for their undivided attention. The turning point, a stark revelation of her escalating malice, occurred when I was a vulnerable 10-year-old. Before a planned family trip, she heartlessly disposed of my entire insulin supply, a catastrophic act that plunged me into the intensive care unit. Her cruelty didn't stop there. She then proceeded to disseminate vicious rumors throughout our school, painting me as a manipulator who fabricated symptoms to receive preferential treatment. Our parents, perhaps blinded by a misguided sense of loyalty or simply unable to fathom the depths of her animosity, urged me to be patient with her, continually assuring me that she was just jealous of the heightened medical attention I required. Little did they comprehend the truly perilous trajectory her festering jealousy would eventually take. When Jade reached the age of 18, she staged a dramatic announcement at dinner, breathlessly declaring that she had been experiencing dizzy spells and uncontrollable shakiness between meals. With a theatrical flourish, she produced one of my personal glucose meters, scrolling through its history. She then brazenly claimed that some of the wonky blood sugars recorded in its memory were, in fact, hers, allegedly from times she had borrowed it. Our mother, ever the doting parent, immediately scheduled an endocrinologist appointment, while Jade, fueled by her delusion, began broadcasting her impending diabetes diagnosis to all her friends. However, the subsequent blood tests delivered an inconvenient truth. Her levels were perfectly, unequivocally normal. Undeterred, Jade stubbornly insisted that the specialists had somehow missed her unique case of reactive hypoglycemia. Within a mere week, her demands escalated. She began to insist on the exact same intricate meal schedule and specialized accommodations that I required, meticulously timing her fabricated symptoms to eerily coincide with my very real insulin injections. Each passing week seemed to usher in a new, dramatic low for Jade. It begged the question, a glaring inconsistency she deliberately ignored. How could one achieve dangerously low blood sugars without the critical step of injecting insulin? A substance Jade never even touched, logic, it seemed, had no place in her elaborate charade. She would stage dramatic collapses in public places, like bustling stores, her body shaking uncontrollably, her voice demanding juice with an urgency that sent waves of panic through innocent bystanders. She meticulously studied my genuine symptoms, perfecting her mimicry to an astonishing degree. She copied the specific, subtle way my hands would tremble, the disorienting confusion that often accompanied a low blood sugar episode, and even the particular telltale slur in my speech when my glucose plummeted too rapidly. She timed her fake episodes for maximum theatrical attention, once orchestrating a truly severe crash right in the middle of my birthday party, convulsing on the floor until someone, out of sheer desperation, shoved a piece of cake into her mouth. The paramedics who inevitably arrived found her blood sugar perfectly normal, but she, ever the master of manipulation, defiantly claimed their meter was broken. Our parents, caught in her web, spent thousands upon thousands of dollars on countless specialists, all of whom, after extensive examinations, found absolutely nothing amiss with Jade's health. Not content with tormenting her family, Jade even joined diabetes support groups, where she shamelessly spread dangerous misinformation to actual diabetics struggling with their conditions. She then concocted an even more outlandish theory. The reason she was experiencing these low blood sugars without injecting insulin, she asserted, was due to proximity exposure to my insulin. Consequently, she demanded separate refrigerators, creating an unnecessary and absurd division in our home. She would routinely rouse our exhausted parents at 3 a.m., dramatically claiming to be experiencing perilous lows, effectively forcing them to prepare her food while I, deemed not an infant, was left to manage my very real, often challenging, overnight blood sugar issues entirely alone. The elaborate facade finally crumbled, spectacularly, on Thanksgiving Day. Jade was in the midst of one of her usual over-the-top dramatic lows when our cousin, visiting from out of state and less susceptible to her long-standing manipulations, casually mentioned seeing Jade devouring a huge stash of candy in her room barely an hour earlier. Jade froze mid-shake, her performance abruptly halted. Our aunt, a seasoned nurse with an astute eye for such trickery, wasted no time. She calmly grabbed Jade's glucose meter and, without a word, tested her blood sugar right there in front of everyone. The reading, a perfectly normal 95, the theatrical shaking, so convincing moments before, stopped immediately, as if by magic, as every single pair of eyes in the room fixed on her. She stammered a feeble excuse, attempting to claim the candy was merely treatment for an earlier low, but our aunt, undeterred, tested her again a mere 10 minutes later. Still 95. As our aunt pointed out with an air of clinical certainty, no diabetic's blood sugar, even after consuming a large amount of candy, remains that perfectly stable. That night, our parents, their faith shattered, painstakingly went through Jade's room. There, hidden amongst her belongings, they found her diary, a damning confession where she admitted to every single detail of her elaborate deception. She had been faking for over a year, meticulously researching every minute aspect of diabetes to make her performance utterly convincing. The next morning, they delivered their verdict. She had precisely 30 days to find somewhere else to live. She unleashed a furious torrent of screams, accusing them of choosing their defective child over their healthy one. But for once, their resolve held firm. They didn't cave to her manipulative tirade. But Jade, it turned out, was far from finished. The very next morning, I woke to the alarming sound of my insulin pump beeping, indicating it was empty an impossibility as I had just meticulously changed it the night before. A cold dread settled in my stomach as I discovered all my backup insulin pens were inexplicably gone from the refrigerator. My emergency glucagon, a critical safeguard, was missing. Even my hidden, secret supply stashed away in my bedroom had vanished without a trace. I found Jade in the kitchen, a chillingly serene expression on her face, holding my entire supply of life-saving medication, a veritable fortune in precious vials, poised directly over the gaping maw of the sink. If I can't have diabetes, she said, her voice unnervingly calm, then neither can you. She had already, with a twisted sense of purpose, flushed half of it down the drain. Thousands of dollars worth of irreplaceable insulin, gone, vanished in mere seconds. The remaining vials, the last vestiges of my lifeline, she held tantalizingly over the garbage disposal, her finger hovering menacingly over the switch. I calculated frantically. I had, at best, maybe 6 hours before my blood sugar would skyrocket to dangerously, catastrophically high levels. A local pharmacy, a beacon of hope usually, was cruelly closed for the holiday weekend and wouldn't reopen for 3 agonizing days. The nearest hospital, a desperate last resort, was a 2-hour drive away. My parents, completely unaware of the unfolding terror, had gone Black Friday shopping, their phones frustratingly unanswered. Without insulin, I knew with a terrifying certainty I would rapidly descend into diabetic ketoacidosis within hours, my blood slowly turning acidic as my body, starved of glucose, began to ruthlessly consume itself. Here's what's going to happen, Jade declared, her voice devoid of any warmth, her fingers still hovering, a silent executioner, above the disposal switch. You're going to tell Mom and Dad that you've been coaching me to fake this entire time. That you specifically taught me how, because you desperately wanted someone to share the attention with. You'll admit you helped me fake all those episodes. Or, she paused, letting the weight of her threat hang heavy. I destroy the rest of this insulin, and you get to experience, firsthand, what a real diabetic emergency truly feels like. My blood sugar, I could already feel it, was relentlessly rising. The early, insidious symptoms were already beginning their unwelcome invasion, the parching thirst, the insistent need to urinate, the subtle, churning nausea that I knew would soon escalate into violent, uncontrolled vomiting. Without insulin, a chilling certainty, I could easily slip into a coma before my parents even made it home. I would die, right there in that kitchen, with Jade, my own sister, calmly watching every agonizing breath leave my body. A twisted, triumphant smile spread across her face as she clearly saw me doing the rapid calculations in my head, desperately assessing how much precious time I had left. Choose quickly, she urged, her voice laced with venomous impatience, subtly tilting the precious vials a fraction closer to the gaping drain. Your blood sugar's already climbing, surging through your veins, a silent, unseen tide. How much higher can it possibly go? I wondered in a cold sweat, before the delicate machinery of your vital organs, one by one, begins its irrevocable shutdown. My gaze was fixed, transfixed really, on the small, precious vials clutched so tightly in her hand, my mind a desperate whirlwind, frantically churning through every conceivable escape route or desperate plea. Beneath those fragile containers, the garbage disposal hummed with a low, predatory growl, a mechanical beast poised to annihilate my soul, dwindling chance at survival. My throat, already parched and scratchy, felt like sandpaper, an unmistakable, terrifying harbinger that my blood glucose levels were not just elevated, but skyrocketing, already pushing past the dangerous 200 milligrams DL mark. Jade, please, I rasped, my voice barely a whisper, a desperate plea clawing its way up from my chest. She simply shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement. Wrong answer, she replied, her voice eerily calm, devoid of any genuine emotion. Without a moment's hesitation, she dropped one of the vials into the churning maw of the disposal and, with a chilling flick of her wrist, activated the switch. The sickening, grinding crunch that followed, a sound of fragile glass and irreplaceable liquid being pulverized, made me lunge forward instinctively, a primal, futile surge of adrenaline. But she was quicker, holding up the remaining insulin vials like a triumphant weapon, a cruel trophy. That's one down, she announced, her smile unsettlingly wide. You've got maybe 4 hours now instead of 6. Want to try again? My hands had begun to tremble uncontrollably, not from the familiar tremors of low blood sugar this time, but from a volatile cocktail of pure, raw adrenaline and the suffocating pressure of my rapidly rising glucose. I retreated slowly, my eyes scanning the room, my mind frantically attempting to form a coherent thought. The old-fashioned landline, my last connection to the outside world, was agonizingly distant, perched in the living room. My cell phone, my lifeline, lay charging uselessly upstairs. Even if, by some miracle, I could reach either device, who would I call in this unfolding nightmare? My parents, unreachable, their phones probably silent. The pharmacy, a beacon of hope on any other day, was undeniably closed. An ambulance, even if summoned, would take at least 30 agonizing minutes to arrive, and Jade, I knew with a chilling certainty, would have obliterated every single vial. Every last shred of my salvation, long before they could even step foot through the door. I can see you calculating, Jade observed, her tone almost conversational, as she smoothly shifted, effectively blocking the kitchen doorway, sealing off my last imagined escape route. Her presence was a suffocating barrier. There's no way out of this. Not for you. Just tell them what I want you to say, just recite the words I need you to utter, and I'll give you back your insulin. A simple, straightforward trade. My eyes flickered, instinctively drawn to the kitchen window. It was small, a narrow rectangular pane, but perhaps, just perhaps, I could contort my body and squeeze through. Jade, as if possessing some uncanny, almost psychic ability, must have followed my gaze. Her hand shot out, seizing a gleaming kitchen knife from its wooden block with practiced ease. Don't even think about it, she warned, the cold metal reflecting the grim light. I'm not going to stab you, or do anything remotely dramatic like that. But I will use this, quite deliberately, to puncture every single one of these vials, rendering them useless, if you so much as attempt to leave this room. The nausea, a queasy churning in my stomach, was intensifying, growing stronger with each passing, agonizing minute. My body, in a desperate, self-destructive bid for energy, had already begun the treacherous switch to breaking down fat, a process that inevitably produces ketones, toxic byproducts that would gradually, insidiously, poison my very blood. I could already taste the faint, unmistakable metallic tang, a bitter prelude, beginning to bloom on my tongue. You know what the funny part is, Jade continued, her voice light, almost amused, as she deliberately placed the knife within easy reach on the counter, a constant, glinting reminder of her power. I actually learned so much about diabetes just from watching you, from observing your daily struggle. I know exactly what's happening to your body right now, every insidious step of this progression. Your cells, desperate and starving, are crying out for energy because they simply cannot utilize the glucose, the very sugar flooding your blood, without the key that is insulin. And your liver, in a misguided, frantic attempt to provide that energy, is actually dumping more sugar into your bloodstream, only exacerbating the crisis, making everything demonstrably worse. She was, horrifyingly, completely right. My blood sugar, I estimated, was probably already skyrocketing, easily approaching the 300 milligrams DL mark by now. The thirst, a searing, all-consuming fire in my throat and mouth, was becoming absolutely unbearable. I yearned for water, my parched body screaming for moisture, but I couldn't risk a single movement, a single step, without jeopardizing the fragile existence of the remaining insulin. In about an hour, she predicted, her voice eerily casual, as if discussing the weather, you'll start vomiting. And then comes the disorienting confusion, the debilitating weakness. Your breathing will become rapid and shallow, almost gasping, as your body frantically tries to compensate for the dangerous acid building up in your system. I've seen you in DKA before, haven't I? Remember that time I accidentally threw away your insulin before our big family trip? That memory, a raw, burning ember, ignited a surge of anger, strong enough to momentarily cut through the encroaching brain fog that had begun to cloud my thoughts. That incident, I recalled with a shudder, had nearly claimed my life, but hadn't quite succeeded. Mom and Dad, bless their worried hearts, had rushed me to the hospital, clutched my hand tightly, and stayed by my bedside for what felt like an eternity. But where, I remembered with a fresh wave of bitterness, had I been in that moment? Shunted off to stay with Aunt Carol, exiled like I was the sole problem, the inconvenient burden. She tightened her grip on the vials, her knuckles white. This time, she declared, her voice laced with venom, they'll truly have to choose. Their precious, perpetually sick child, or their healthy one who just desperately wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged. I pressed my palms flat against the cool counter, exerting all my dwindling strength, attempting to steady my trembling body. The room itself seemed to be growing strangely, uncomfortably warm, stifling almost. My skin was starting to develop the telltale dry, flesh sensation, the undeniable signature of critically high blood sugar. What happens when I'm in a coma? I challenged, my voice hoarse, attempting to inject a sliver of logic into her twisted game. When they finally find me, unconscious and unresponsive on this floor, do you truly believe they'll buy your fabricated story, your coached narrative, after you've literally murdered me? In all but name. You're being dramatic, she scoffed, dismissing my desperate appeal with a dismissive wave of her hand. You won't die. You'll just get sick enough, just incapacitated enough, that when I find you and heroically save you with this precious insulin, you'll be so overwhelmed with gratitude, so utterly indebted, that you'll be more than willing to say anything, absolutely anything I want. A chilling smile, cold and self-satisfied, bloomed on her face. I've thought this through meticulously, every single detail. I'll be the valiant hero who discovered her poor diabetic sibling in the throes of a life-threatening crisis and, against all odds, saved the day. She paused, her eyes gleaming with a perverse satisfaction. Finally, I'll be the one taking care of you instead of the other way around. Won't that be a delightful change? My vision was beginning to blur, ever so slightly, the edges of the room softening, losing their sharp definition. Not yet dangerously impaired, but enough, critically enough, to hammer home the terrifying realization that my time was rapidly, inexorably, running out. I desperately needed those vials, those precious drops of life, but Jade had positioned herself with a cunning, almost military precision. The disposal, that mechanical maw of destruction, hung directly behind her. The glinting knife lay within easy reach of her hand, and her eyes, sharp and blinking, meticulously tracked my every hesitant movement. You want some water, she taunted, her voice dripping with cruel mockery, a perverse invitation. Your mouth must be so terribly dry by now, like dessert dust. She paused, considering, a finger tapping her chin. That's what, 350, my dear. How high does your meter even read anymore? Has it maxed out? I didn't answer, my voice trapped by the constriction in my throat, my mind consumed by a frantic internal search. I was trying, in a desperate, fading hope, to recall if I had stashed any forgotten insulin, perhaps an old pen, in a jacket pocket somewhere else in the sprawling house. But Jade, I realized with a sickening lurch, had been utterly thorough. She must have scoured every conceivable hiding spot, meticulously searching everywhere, while I lay sleeping, blissfully unaware, in my bed. You know what I hated most of all, Jade continued, her voice laced with a bitter resentment that deepened with every word. It was the way everyone, always, asked about you first. How's your sister doing? They chime, their voices oozing with concern. There was something profoundly unsettling about witnessing Jade's almost academic study of her sister's medical condition, as if she were meticulously preparing for a demanding theatrical role. The chilling precision with which she had memorized those specific tremors, those subtle shifts in speech patterns, indicated a level of dedication to this elaborate deception that made me wonder, with a rising sense of dread, what deeper, darker currents were truly flowing beneath the surface of her mind, beyond the relatively simple emotion of jealousy. Is her blood sugar okay? Does she need anything? It was as if I simply didn't exist unless it was in direct relation to your chronic disease, as if my identity was utterly subsumed by your illness. The room, a dizzying sensation, seemed to tilt sickeningly around me. I gripped the counter harder, knuckles white with strain, fighting against the encroaching disorientation. And the special meals, she continued, her voice growing sharper, the meticulous counting of cards, the constant, incessant checking everything, absolutely everything, revolved around the singular imperative of keeping you alive. While I was simply expected to be endlessly grateful that I was healthy, she let out a short, bitter laugh, devoid of any genuine mirth. Do you have any idea, any conception, of how utterly invisible that makes you feel? To stand by and watch our parents panic, their faces etched with frantic worrying over every single number displayed on your meter, while my straight A's, my academic achievements, seemingly meant absolutely nothing, utterly insignificant in comparison. I yearned to argue, to somehow summon the strength to tell her, to scream at her that she was profoundly, tragically wrong, that her perception was warped and cruel. But my energy, a finite resource, was rapidly, irrevocably fading. The ketones, those insidious toxins, were now building up within me with alarming speed, accelerating their deadly work. My breathing, once deep and regular, was growing heavier, more labored, each breath a conscious effort. That's why I had to do it, she declared, her voice cold, resolute, a chilling justification for her monstrous act. I had to show them finally what it felt like, just for once, to truly worrying about me. The hurried efficiency with which she'd usher me to every clinic visit, the quiet footsteps padding into my room in the dead of night just to ensure I was breathing. The almost zealous dedication to placing my needs, my very survival above all else. Yet, that carefully constructed edifice of devotion, that comforting illusion, now shattered into a million shards of deceit. Every tender gesture, every whispered reassurance, every selfless act she meticulously performed a hollow charade, a joked, defiant so what, somehow clawed its way from my constricting throat. A desperate attempt to feign indifference, to shield myself from the brutal truth. Because in that moment, even knowing the ugly truth, the feeling of being seen, of being truly cared for, had been undeniably potent. The fervent attention, the palpable concern they had resonated deep within me, filling an aching void. For a fleeting, precious time, I had felt as significant, as absolutely crucial, as she perceived herself to be. Her hand, still holding those precious, life-sustaining vials aloft, became a cruel scepter of power, a stark symbol of my impending doom. And this time, she declared with chilling conviction, I would truly matter. Not just to her, but in a way that would dismantle everything. Because when you confessed to them that you aided my charade, she elaborated, her voice a silken thread of malice, they'll finally see beyond the facade of their perfect, suffering child. They'll realize you're not some ethereal, innocent victim, but a calculating strategist. Just as adept at weaving webs of deception as any common schemer, a tremor began to ripple through my already weakened legs, a terrifying internal tremor that threatened to buckle my knees. To betray the fragile composure I desperately clung to. Every instinct screamed at me to collapse onto the nearest chair to seek refuge from the encroaching dread, but I couldn't. Not now, not in front of her. To reveal even a flicker of vulnerability would be to concede defeat, to give her another weapon against me. Jade, seemingly enjoying my discomfort, leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as if sharing a secret. The truth is, she confessed, I became quite adept at simulating hypoglycemia. The uncontrollable tremors, the bewildered gaze, that vacant, unfocused stare I painstakingly rehearsed every subtle nuance in front of a mirror for what felt like endless hours, perfecting the illusion. But there are some things, she added, a wicked glint in her eyes as she made a sweeping, almost dismissive gesture in my direction that even I, with all my dedication, could never replicate. She cataloged my deteriorating condition with clinical precision. The peculiar, parched flesh spreading across your skin. That telltale fruity, acetone scent on your breath unmistakable, isn't it? And the constant, desperate swallowing because your mouth feels like a desert. That's authentic, uncontrolled diabetes. That's the undeniable truth of decay bearing down on you. And that, my dear sibling, is precisely what will claim your life, slowly and agonizingly, if you dare to defy my conditions. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, desperate drum solo, struggling to propel the increasingly viscous, acid-laden blood through my veins. Each beat felt like an agonizing effort, a stark reminder of the internal battle raging within. And there, suspended tantalizingly close, was my lifeline, the precious insulin clutched in Jade's hand, representing my sole hope for survival, the only antidote to this slow, biochemical poisoning. Yet, even as the walls closed in, I knew, with a certainty that transcended the pain, that I could not yield to her demands, could not surrender to this despicable extortion. To admit to our parents that I had, however unwittingly, facilitated her elaborate deception would be to irrevocably shatter their trust. It wasn't merely a temporary stain on my character. It would be a permanent fracture. Every genuine symptom I experienced thereafter, every undeniable sign of distress, would be met with suspicion, every life-threatening emergency dismissed with a cynical, "Are you sure this is real?" The very foundation of my relationship with them would crumble, leaving me isolated and vulnerable. Tick-tock, Jade drawled, her voice a chilling mimicry of a clock, emphasizing the precious, dwindling moments. Just how stratospheric can your glucose levels climb? 500, 600. Let's see how far you push it this time. She continued, I personally witnessed your glucose meter display high at 600. Remember? That terrifying episode when you were so profoundly ill, so utterly incapacitated, you couldn't even summon the strength to stand upright, the visceral recollection of that horrifying day. A dark stain on my memory sent a fresh wave of dizziness washing over me, forcing a barely perceptible sway. It had been, without exaggeration, one of the darkest, most agonizing days of my existence, and with terrifying clarity, I could feel myself hurtling back toward that same precipice. The cruelest irony. This time, the very salvation I desperately craved, the life-saving insulin, was not miles away in an ambulance, but directly within my sight, a tangible promise, yet brutally held captive by the hands of my own sister. You're sweating, she noted, her gaze sharp and dissecting. That's a novel development. Typically, in this state, you tend to be parched and intensely flushed, not glistening. She pondered aloud, almost clinically. It must be the surge of adrenaline. A primal fight-or-flight response clashing violently with the overwhelming burden of critically high blood sugar. Your body, caught in an agonizing physiological paradox, can't decide whether to unleash a desperate panic or simply surrender and shut down entirely. And in that moment, she was chillingly accurate. I felt myself suspended precariously between the primal, adrenaline-fueled instinct to fight for my life and the insidious, deepening lethargy that signaled the grim progression of decay. Threatening to pull me under, my limbs felt heavy, strangely disconnected, yet a coiled tension persisted deep within my muscles, a dormant spring ready to launch me forward, should even the slimmest opportunity for action present itself. I'm going to make this incredibly simple for you, Jade offered, a veneer of false benevolence coloring her words. Just nod, a single, simple affirmative nod, and I'll relinquish one vial. Enough, mind you, to merely stabilize you, to bridge the gap until you can articulate your full and complete agreement to my conditions. But then her hand, with calculated slowness, began to drift once more toward the menacing maw of the garbage disposal. The chilling, guttural grinding sound from moments before reverberated with terrifying clarity inside my mind, a harbinger of imminent destruction. That gut-wrenching memory of thousands upon thousands of dollars worth of indispensable, life-saving medication, annihilated in mere, unforgiving seconds, tightened its icy grip on my chest. My thoughts, even amidst the encroaching fog, flew to the countless diabetics across the country, those who tragically rationed their insulin, stretching meager supplies because the exorbitant cost denied them access. And here, before my very eyes, was my own sister, callously obliterating this precious elixir, not out of necessity, but from a place of pure, unadulterated malice. You're overthinking this, she chided, her tone laced with impatience, as if I were a particularly slow student. This isn't some convoluted philosophical conundrum or an intricate logic puzzle designed to test your intellect. It's starkly simple, isn't it? Your very life, or your carefully constructed reputation. Which, pray tell, holds more intrinsic value to you? A disturbing sense of detachment began to settle over me, as if I were observing the entire chilling tableau from a vantage point outside my own failing body, a disembodied spectator to my own demise. This wasn't merely a trick of the light or a psychological defense. It was a deeply ominous symptom. I knew with a terrifying medical clarity that unchecked, severe decay could rapidly progress to profound confusion, unsettling delirium, and even vivid, terrifying hallucinations. The clock wasn't just ticking on my physical well-being. It was rapidly eroding my cognitive faculties. I had to make a move to find a way out before the insidious fog completely enveloped my mind and robbed me of the capacity for rational thought. One single nod, Jade reiterated, her voice a relentless drill sergeant. That's all it takes. A simple downward and upward tilt of your head, and this agonizing nightmare, this terrifying ordeal, will finally reach its conclusion. But even as the words left her lips, a cold, hard certainty settled in my gut. This was a lie, a seductive illusion. The nightmare wouldn't end. It would merely evolve, twisting into something far more insidious. Even if I succumbed, even if I articulated the deceitful narrative she so desperately craved to our parents, Jade would possess an indelible power over me. This blackmail would become a perpetual shadow, an eternal weapon. Each future whim, every desire, would be enforced with the chilling threat of exposing the truth. And this was perhaps the most terrifying prospect. She would simply orchestrate this cruel charade all over again, a repeating cycle of torment. My entire existence would be reduced to a fragile dance at her capricious mercy, a horrifying anticipation of the next act. I would live in constant dread, never knowing when she might, on a whim, snatch away my life-sustaining insulin, only to stand by and observe my agonizing, inevitable suffering with that chilling, detached fascination. You're truly running out of time, she announced, her voice a predatory purr, watching me with unnerving intensity. I can clearly discern it in your eyes. They're acquiring that peculiar, distant, glassy sheen, aren't they? How much longer, she mused, drawing at the question, before your comprehension completely falters? Before my words become nothing more than a meaningless jumble of sounds? The familiar contours of the kitchen began to undulate and sway, the entire room seeming to revolve around me in a slow, dizzying spiral, making it impossible to anchor my gaze. I desperately attempted to lock my focus onto her face, to find some anchor in the blurring reality, but her features kept shimmering, dissolving, then re-emerging, elusive and menacing, slipping in and out of any tangible clarity. My breaths, I noticed with a rising sense of alarm, were unequivocally faster now, shallow and hurried. My body, a desperate, frantic machine, was instinctually striving to hyperventilate, to rapidly expel the mounting excess of dangerous acid that was relentlessly building up in my very bloodstream, threatening to overwhelm my system. This, Jade announced, her voice dripping with an almost righteous indignation. This is precisely the harrowing ordeal you subject mom and dad to every single time you plummet into one of your self-induced crises. This crushing fear, this agonizing helplessness only for them, there's no easy escape, no simple nod that can magically make it all vanish. They are condemned to stand by, to witness your suffering, praying with every fiber of their being that the insulin, if it ever arrives, will act in time, a surge of desperate, indignant words welled up within me, a furious desire to clarify that I never, not for an instant, chose this affliction, never willingly sought to inflict such terror upon them. But my tongue, swollen and heavy, felt like a foreign, unresponsive object in my mouth. My vocal cords, too, seemed to betray me. The words themselves, once so clear in my mind, refused to coalesce, emerging instead as a garbled, unintelligible mess. Last chance, she pronounced, her voice devoid of any genuine emotion, simultaneously raising the cluster of vials, now glinting malevolently in the harsh kitchen light. Not now, or I consign every last one of these to the drain, irrevocably. A frantic, desperate calculus began to unfold in my mind, a race against the ever-thickening, encroaching fog that threatened to obscure every rational thought. The digital readout on the kitchen clock glowed with chilling precision, 8:47 a.m. My parents, immersed in the frenzy of Black Friday shopping, wouldn't return until at least noon, a harrowing 3 hours away. 3 hours for what? For my body to completely give up. My blood sugar, a relentless, invisible adversary, was unmistakably soaring past the 400 milligrams DL mark now, a grim assessment based on the intensifying symptoms, the increasingly pervasive, sickeningly metallic taste that coated my tongue with every desperate swallow, growing sharper, more insistent. Jade, with a predator's acute awareness, intercepted my fleeting glance at the clock, and her smile, already unsettling, stretched wider, revealing a chilling delight. Deliberately, she shifted the vials, drawing them inexorably closer to the disposal's unforgiving opening, allowing them to clink with a perverse, mocking symphony against the cold, metallic rim. That agonizing, metallic jam reverberated through my entire being, making my stomach knot into a cold, hard clench. Each delicate glass vial represented not just a dose, but days of continued existence, precious spans of life. Yet she handled them with the careless indifference of a child toying with disposable trinkets. My legs, now almost completely unsupported, abruptly buckled beneath me, threatening a full collapse. I barely managed to brace myself against the cool, unforgiving surface of the kitchen counter, my fingers digging in for purchase. But even that fleeting moment of vulnerability was not lost on Jade. Her eyes, sharp and predatory, tracked my faltering strength. She leaned in closer, a grotesque smile playing on her lips, observing my rapidly deteriorating state with an almost academic fascination, as if I were a specimen under a microscope. Her meticulous research, her twisted immersion into the intricacies of my illness had clearly served her well. She understood, with precise, clinical accuracy, every agonizing biochemical process unfolding within my failing body. An all-consuming, desperate thirst now engulfed me, a primal need for water that eclipsed all other sensations. My tongue felt like a dry, coarse piece of leather painfully adhered to the roof of my parched mouth. I tried, instinctively, to moisten my cracking lips, but there was no trace of saliva, only a lingering, dusty dryness, and Jade, of course, missed nothing. Her gaze, still fixed on my desperate attempts, registered my profound dehydration. With an infuriating nonchalance, she ambled to the cabinet, retrieved a crystal clear glass, and proceeded to fill it with wonderfully, agonizingly cold water from the tap. Then, with deliberate, unhurried movements, she raised it to her lips, taking slow, luxurious sips, her eyes never once breaking contact with mine. A chilling display of psychological torture. In that suffocating crucible of thirst and despair, with the relentless clock ticking down my remaining capacity, a stark, agonizing decision solidified in my mind. The primal urge to lunge, to snatch, to fight had completely receded. It was no longer a viable option. My reflexes, dulled by the acid and high sugar, were agonizingly sluggish, and my muscles, already weakened and cramping from profound dehydration, were in no condition for a desperate struggle. But I could still think, even if the edges of my thoughts were fraying, at least for this fleeting moment. So, with a heavy, leaden weight in my soul, I executed a single, almost imperceptible, not just enough movement, just enough concession, for her to undoubtedly register my surrender. And in that instant, a chilling, triumphant light ignited in Jade's eyes, a cruel incandescent glow that mirrored the darkness descending upon my world. With a triumphant glint in her eyes, a look that spoke volumes of calculated victory, she carefully set down the water glass. Her gaze sharp and predatory, then fixated on the collection of vials, and she selected one, turning it over in her fingers, examining it with the intensity one might reserve for a newly acquired, highly coveted prize. Yet, after a moment, a subtle shake of her head and a soft, almost cruel laugh escaped her lips. The chosen vial was returned to its brethren, its moment in the spotlight over. A simple nod, she explained, was utterly insufficient. She didn't just want my compliance, she demanded a full, convincing performance, insisting that I practice the story first, every intricate detail polished to absolute perfection. How, she elaborated with chilling precision, I had supposedly taught her to convincingly fake symptoms. How we had meticulously planned this elaborate deception together, step by agonizing step. How I had helped her research diabetes, delving into medical complexities to ensure her performance would be utterly flawless, utterly believable. She expected me to rehearse until the entire fabricated narrative flowed from my lips as naturally as if it were the undeniable truth, until it was utterly indistinguishable from reality. My vision, already tenuous, began to swim uncontrollably, the edges of my perception blurring into a hazy, watercolor wash. Below me, the once stable kitchen tiles seemed to warp and ripple like a disturbed pool of water, mocking my increasingly precarious grip on reality. I clutched the cool laminate countertop with desperate force, my fingernails digging painful crescents into its surface, anchoring myself against the swirling chaos. The sheer effort of standing upright had become a monumental, Herculean task, draining every last vestige of my strength. My very physiology had turned against me, my body, in a desperate, futile attempt to find sustenance, was cannibalizing itself, relentlessly breaking down precious muscle and stored fat. Yet, tragically, it was an energy it couldn't properly metabolize, a cruel irony that left me feeling utterly drained, a mere hollow shell. Then, with an almost theatrical flourish, Jade pulled out her phone, its screen glowing brightly in the dim kitchen light, and began recording. She craved tangible, irrefutable video evidence of my confession, irrefutable proof, she declared, that I was perfectly coherent, speaking voluntarily, and utterly complicit. She positioned the phone meticulously on the counter, adjusting the angle with a practiced hand, ensuring it captured both of us within its unforgiving lens of silent, digital witness to my forced capitulation. I parted my lips, desperate to speak, to perhaps plead, but only a dry, rasping croak emerged, a sound barely audible above the hum of the refrigerator. My throat felt like parched sandpaper, utterly devoid of moisture. Jane sighed dramatically, a theatrical display of her impatience, and with a deliberate slide, pushed the water glass back across the counter towards me. I snatched it up with a desperate, trembling hand, gulping down the entire contents in a single, unthinking draught. The relief, though profound, was agonizingly brief, a fleeting mirage. Within mere seconds, the relentless, scorching thirst returned, worse than before, a burning inferno in my throat. Her voice, sharp as a whip, cut through the haze. She demanded I start talking. I began stammering through her meticulously crafted fictional narrative, each word a monumental struggle, but my syllables slurred together, indistinguishable, like wet paint blending on a canvas. The brain fog, a thick, suffocating shroud, was rapidly descending, clouding my every thought. Simple sentences, once effortlessly formed, now presented themselves as complex, insurmountable puzzles. Jade's frustration with my failing performance became palpable, her features tightening with thinly veiled anger. Twice, she made me restart the entire humiliating recitation, her patience wearing thin, each stumble met with a chilling thread of subtle, yet undeniably potent, gesture towards the vials of insulin. Then, without warning, the nausea hit with a violent, stomach-churning force. I doubled over, my body convulsing, dry heaving uncontrollably into the sterile white sink. There was nothing to expel, not even the bitter taste of bile. My stomach had been utterly empty since the meager dinner of the night before, a stark testament to my failing state. Jade, recoiling in disgust, took a step back, but her phone, her unwavering recording device, remained fixed on me, documenting my humiliation. Her voice, devoid of empathy, became a cold, clinical narration of my symptoms to the camera, meticulously documenting my physical decline as if I were a fascinating, albeit failing, science experiment. When the violent heaving finally subsided, I slumped against the cold counter, every muscle protesting, my legs shaking uncontrollably. This was not the practiced tremor of hypoglycemia, a familiar sensation I understood, but the profound, bone-deep weakness of a body systematically shutting down, abandoning its functions. My legs gave out entirely, and I slid to the floor, my back hitting the unforgiving cabinets with a dull thud. The cool tiles against my feverish skin offered a fleeting, almost welcome, sense of relief. Jade crouched down to my level, her eyes unwavering, ensuring the insulin vials remained prominently visible, a constant, menacing reminder of her ultimate power. She reminded me, her voice cutting through the fog, that we weren't done, not by a long shot. The confession, she insisted, still needed to be complete, still needed to be utterly convincing, a perfect testament to my supposed guilt. But forming coherent thoughts, let alone stringing them into sentences, was fast becoming an impossible feat. Words, elusive and intangible, simply floated away before I could grasp them, dissolving into the swirling vortex of my deteriorating mind. Her impatience with my increasingly incoherent speech mounted visibly. Standing abruptly, she began to pace the confined space of the kitchen, muttering under her breath about timing, a chilling echo of her calculated cruelty. She needed me to remain functional enough to deliver the confession, yet simultaneously sick enough to be utterly grateful for any perceived mercy, any flicker of hope. The window of opportunity, she seemed to realize, was rapidly narrowing. She checked her phone with a nervous flick of her wrist, meticulously calculating when our parents might, God forbid, return home, disrupting her meticulous plan. I tried to stand, to find some semblance of control, but my legs, rubbery and unresponsive, utterly refused to cooperate. The entire room spun violently, a dizzying carousel of blurred shapes and colors. I instinctively closed my eyes, but that only intensified the crushing wave of nausea, making it even more unbearable. My breathing, once deep and regular, had become rapid and alarmingly shallow, my body desperately attempting to expel the building acid through my lungs, a futile effort. Each breath felt pathetically insufficient, a gasp for air that never quite filled my burning lungs. Jade, ever the meticulous observer, noticed my frantic breathing pattern and nodded knowingly, a cold, clinical affirmation. She had studied this too, hadn't she? 2 small respirations, she announced proudly, her voice devoid of emotion, deep, labored breathing that signifies the acid levels are becoming critical. She then calmly estimated, almost as if discussing the weather, that I had maybe an hour before consciousness itself became questionable, before I completely slipped away. The confession attempt, relentless as a broken record, resumed. She coached me, her voice a relentless drone, through the exact words she wanted to hear. But my responses were increasingly fragmented, increasingly incoherent, mere unintelligible garbles. Frustration, raw and undisguised, flashed across her face, a brief crack in her carefully constructed facade of control. Her perfectly orchestrated plan hinged entirely on my cooperation, but my body, frustratingly, was failing faster than she had ever anticipated, betraying her careful calculations. She made a snap decision, a new approach born of desperation. Grabbing a notepad from a nearby drawer, she began to write out the confession herself, her pen scratching furiously across the paper. All I had to do, she decreed, was simply copy it, painstakingly, in my own handwriting, lending it the veneer of authenticity. She thrust the pen at me, its cold plastic barrel jarring against my clammy skin, but my hand shook too violently, too uncontrollably, to grip it properly. With a soft clatter, the pen tumbled from my numb fingers, landing uselessly on the floor. My vision, already compromised, began to tunnel, the world shrinking to a pinprick. Dark, dancing spots, like swarms of angry gnats, multiplied at the edges of my fading sight. Jade's transformation, from jealous sister to part-time doctor, was quite the bewildering career change, wasn't it? Studying symptoms with such intense focus, as if she were preparing for medical school, rather than merely orchestrating a vulgar blackmail scheme. I blinked hard, desperately trying to clear the encroaching darkness, but the spots only multiplied, growing bolder, more numerous. Jade's face, once sharply defined, blurred into an indistinct, shapeless mass. Her voice, too, sounded distant, muffled, as if she were speaking from another room, miles away, her words reaching me through a thick, suffocating wall. She slapped my face lightly, a sharp, stinging touch, attempting to restore focus, to drag me back from the brink. The contact felt strangely alien, utterly disconnected from my rapidly failing body, a sensation like being touched through a pane of thick glass. She was losing her window, she surely realized. If I passed out, if consciousness finally abandoned me before the confession was complete, her meticulously crafted leverage would vanish into thin air. She would be forced to administer the life-saving insulin, or risk me dying a catastrophic outcome that would, without a shadow of a doubt, ruin everything she had planned. The next wave of nausea was violent, an uncontrollable surge that racked my already weakened frame. This time, my stomach, against all odds, found something to expel. The acrid ball burned my throat, a searing liquid fire that left me gasping. Jade jumped back with a startled cry, a string of curses escaping her lips. She snatched up a roll of paper towels, throwing them at me in disgust, as if I were something vile and contaminating. The foul smell of the bile, combined with her recoiling horror, only intensified the crushing nausea, making it utterly unbearable. Then, her voice cutting through the haze of my suffering, she announced yet another new plan. If I couldn't speak, if I couldn't even write, she would accept a video of me simply nodding along, a mute affirmation, as she recounted her carefully constructed story. Simple yes movements to her direct questions, that's all she required. She repositioned the phone once more, her movements sharp and precise, and started recording again. But even the simple act of nodding, a basic motor function, was rapidly becoming an impossible feat. My neck muscles felt weak, insubstantial, utterly unable to support the weight of my head properly. It lolled to one side, a grotesque, limp marionette. Jade, her frustration mounting, grabbed my chin, her grip firm and unyielding, forcing my gaze towards the unblinking eye of the camera. Her touch, even through the clammy sheen on my skin, felt searingly hot. The questions began, each one a hammer blow. Did I help her fake diabetes? A weak, almost imperceptible nod. Did I teach her the symptoms? Another barely there movement of my head. But my responses were so small, so uncertain, so devoid of conviction, that even Jade, with her desperate need for proof, could see they wouldn't convince anyone, not truly. She needed me to be more coherent, more visibly responsive. A decision, cold and calculated, flickered in her eyes. Opening one of the vials with a practiced ease, she drew up a tiny, almost imperceptible amount of insulin into a syringe. Not enough to save me, not enough to truly reverse the terrifying decline, but just enough, she calculated, to stabilize me temporarily. She would administer small, carefully metered doses, keeping me functional enough for her purposes, but utterly dependent on her for my very survival. Control through chemistry, a perverse and terrifying manipulation. The needle, a glinting sliver of silver, approached my arm, a harbinger of forced compliance. I tried to pull away, to escape its impending sting, but lacked even the most rudimentary strength. My limbs felt like lead, my will powerless. Then, a sudden, unexpected sound made us both freeze, an abrupt rupture in the tense silence of the kitchen. A car door slammed shut outside, the sharp noise echoing through the seemingly impenetrable walls of our quiet home. Jade rushed to the window, her movements swift and panicked, peering anxiously through the thin slats of the blinds. Our elderly neighbor, Mrs. Buford, a creature of comforting, predictable routine, was merely getting her morning paper from the mailbox. Jade watched, her breath held, until Mrs. Buford, oblivious to the drama unfolding mere yards away, went back inside her own house. The brief, mundane interruption had clearly rattled her, unsettling her carefully constructed composure. She hadn't, it seemed, truly considered the possibility that others might notice something wrong, might peer too closely into the quiet facade of our normally serene neighborhood. The world outside, she now realized, wasn't as oblivious as she'd hoped. The entire town seemed to be cloaked in a tranquil stillness, a rare quietude attributable to the extended holiday weekend when families traditionally gathered, retreating into the comfort of their homes. This meant fewer casual passers-by, fewer opportunities for an unexpected interruption that could jeopardize Jade's precarious scheme. When Jade reappeared, her eyes, once alight with a strange, determined fervor, now registered a flicker of something akin to alarm, or perhaps just cold calculation. She found me in an even more desperate state, my body having surrendered further to the relentless attack of DKA, now slumped even lower against the cold, unyielding kitchen cabinets. Was this truly the progression she had envisioned? Or was the grim reality of my deteriorating condition beginning to gnaw at her resolve? My lungs, once effortlessly drawing in life-giving oxygen, now felt like ancient, creaking bellows, struggling to inflate. Each breath was no longer an unconscious reflex, but a monumental, agonizingly conscious effort, a defiant battle against the suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. It felt as though I was trying to breathe through a thick, viscous fluid, every inhale a painful reminder of my body's desperate fight for survival. In her hand, clutched almost protectively, was the vial of insulin, a fragile glass vessel containing the very essence of my salvation, a literal lifeline. Yet a palpable tension radiated from her, a hesitant pause that stretched into an eternity. It was a cruel paradox, the cure so near, yet withheld, tantalizingly out of reach. For Jade, this was more than just a medical intervention. It was a strategic move in her meticulously crafted, twisted game. To administer even a drop of that precious liquid would be to cede a crucial measure of her newfound power, to relinquish the psychological leverage she had so meticulously established. Once the insulin began its work, restoring a semblance of my coherence and strength, her carefully constructed narrative, her absolute dominion over my fate, would begin to crumble. The thought was clearly anathema to her. So, rather than providing the urgent medical aid I so desperately needed, she opted for another, more insidious tactic, a purely psychological assault designed to break my will and secure her desired outcome without sacrificing her control. It was a cunning, cold-blooded maneuver, a testament to the depth of her manipulative intent. Her voice, now laced with a bitter resentment that seemed to curdle the air, began to chronicle a twisted litany of my privileges. She dredged up every instance where my diabetes had inadvertently placed me in the spotlight, painting these moments as unfair advantages rather than challenging necessities. Remember that time you were the center of attention in the emergency room, with doctors bustling around you? Her words seemed to sneer. Or how Mrs. Henderson, the eternally vigilant third-grade teacher, would always single you out, her brow furrowed with concern, while I sat unnoticed. And what about all those special accommodations, the extra snack breaks, the excused absences that made your life easier? Each memory, a shard of perceived injustice, was hurled at me with chilling precision. She enumerated these past events not as unfortunate realities of a chronic illness, but as undeniable crimes, a series of perceived offenses that had somehow robbed her of the recognition she believed was rightfully hers. With each accusation, she meticulously built her warped case, justifying in her own distorted logic why she, too, deserved to experience the benefits of feigning the same life-altering condition. It was a chilling testament to her profound sense of entitlement and invisible suffering. Her venomous words, though sharp and biting, began to dissolve into the deepening fog clouding my mind. They drifted in and out, like radio signals battling static, becoming increasingly disjointed and difficult to grasp. I caught fleeting, ghost-like fragments, whispers of fairness, fervent declarations of being seen, and mournful, echoing lament about years of invisibility. These were the battle cries of her own deep-seated resentment, her desperate plea for validation in a world she felt had overlooked her for too long. But processing her bitter narrative, even in its fragmented form, demanded a cognitive energy I simply no longer possessed. My body, a besieged fortress under relentless assault, had ruthlessly prioritized its remaining precious resources. Every ounce of available energy was being hoarded, meticulously conserved for the most primal, non-negotiable function, basic, agonizing survival. Understanding her twisted logic was an unaffordable luxury. Then, abruptly, a jarring sound sliced through the heavy, suffocating silence of the kitchen, the insistent chime of the doorbell. It was a sound utterly incongruous with the grim tableau before us, an unexpected intrusion from the outside world. We both flinched violently or shared involuntary spasm of surprise. Our carefully constructed, isolated bubble momentarily shattered. Jade's eyes, previously narrowed with a cold, calculating resolve, now snapped wide open, dilating with pure, unadulterated panic. A cold, stark terror replaced her earlier composure. Her carefully laid plans, predicated on absolute isolation, had not accounted for such a random, inconvenient breach. The very thought of an outsider stumbling upon this macabre scene clearly sent a jolt of ice through her veins. With a monumental effort, I shifted my gaze toward the kitchen window, my vision still blurry and swimming. There, parked conspicuously at the curb, was the unmistakable brown and gold livery of a delivery truck. The driver, a uniformed figure holding a package, stood impatiently at our front door, his finger already poised to ring the bell again. Its insistent chime of further torment to Jade's fraying nerves. The mundane act of a package delivery had become a terrifying, disruptive force. Jade was trapped in an immediate, unenviable dilemma. To ignore the persistent ringing would be to invite suspicion, to signal that something was amiss within the seemingly peaceful confines of our home. A locked door and an answered summons during a holiday weekend could easily raise alarms, potentially drawing unwanted attention that she desperately sought to avoid. She had no choice but to confront this unexpected intrusion. With a lightning-quick, almost practiced movement, she swept the remaining insulin vials from the counter, burying them deep within the folds of her pocket, as if they were contraband. Then, her gaze locking onto mine with chilling intensity, she raised the knife, its polished blade catching the faint kitchen light. It wasn't an overtly aggressive gesture, but a silent, unequivocal warning, the stark, terrifying promise of what would happen if I dared to utter a sound. If I tried to betray her carefully guarded secret. The message was clear. Silence was my only option for survival. Then, with a remarkable display of calculated self-control, she took a deep, stunning breath, her features smoothing into a facade of calm. It was a stark transformation, like an actress stepping onto a stage, shedding her true emotions to embody a fabricated role. Her footsteps, though perhaps a shade too brisk, carried her purposefully toward the front door, ready to face the unwitting outsider. From my agonizing position on the cold kitchen floor, I could faintly discern the muffled cadence of conversation through the closed door. The driver's voice, a low rumble, seemed to convey a request for a signature, a simple, everyday transaction fraught with unimaginable tension. Then, Jade's voice cut through, unnervingly bright and artificially cheerful, like a strained melody played off-key. "Oh, thank you so much for working on the holiday," she chirped, her tone oozing a sweetness that felt utterly false. A desperate attempt to project normalcy and deflect any lingering suspicions. A decisive click echoed as the front door closed, sealing us once more within the oppressive confines of the house. Almost immediately, her footsteps returned, no longer composed but quick and agitated, a frantic staccato against the tile floor. The brief encounter had clearly rattled her, stripping away the thin veneer of her calm, revealing the raw, frayed nerves beneath. Her eyes, darting around the kitchen, quickly landed on me. In a desperate, futile gamble, I had managed to drag my ravaged body, inch by agonizing inch, away from the kitchen, aiming for the distant promise of the landline phone in the living room. My feeble escape attempt had barely covered 3 feet, a pitiful distance that felt like a marathon in my weakened state, a testament to my dwindling strength and desperate hope. My arms, trembling violently with the monumental effort, were like flimsy branches unable to support my weight, each movement a fresh agony. Before I could cover another inch, Jade was upon me, her grip like an iron vice around my ankle. Without a word, she began to drag me unceremoniously back across the cold, unyielding floor toward the kitchen, toward the silent judgment of the cabinets. It was a humiliating, brutal reclamation. The sudden, jarring movement, combined with the extreme physical exertion, sent a blinding wave of white light washing over my already compromised vision. It was as if a sudden, internal flashbulb had detonated, momentarily erasing all color and form, leaving me suspended in a terrifying void, teetering on the precipice of unconsciousness. Her earlier, strained calm had completely evaporated, replaced by a surge of raw, unadulterated fury that distorted her features. The brief, unexpected interruption, like a sudden crack in a carefully constructed dam, had brutally laid bare the inherent precariousness, the terrifying fragility of her elaborate plan. The fleeting encounter with the delivery driver had served as a stark, unwelcome reminder of just how easily her carefully orchestrated scheme could unravel. How vulnerable she was to external forces. A torrent of terrifying what-ifs must have flooded her mind. What if another unexpected visitor were to appear at the door? What if our parents, whose absence was a crucial element of our timeline, decided to return home hours ahead of schedule? What if a vigilant neighbor, perhaps Mrs. Buford from next door, were to notice an uncharacteristic silence or a peculiar sight, prompting them to investigate? The potential pitfalls, once seemingly distant, now loomed large and imminent. A desperate, chilling resolve hardened her gaze. She needed to conclude this harrowing ordeal, to seal my fate and secure her narrative, with an alarming swiftness. There was no more time for psychological games or drawn-out manipulations. The clock was ticking, mercilessly. With a grim determination, she retrieved the remaining insulin vials from her pocket, no longer bothering to conceal them. She meticulously lined them up on the pristine white kitchen counter, a chilling, deliberate display. Each slender glass cylinder, containing a precious few milliliters of life-sustaining liquid, now stood like a condemned prisoner awaiting its execution. A stark visual representation of her chilling intent. And then, in a voice devoid of emotion, she began her macabre ritual. One by one, she pointed to each vial, imbuing it with a symbolic weight, assigning it a specific crime I had supposedly committed against her. A specific grievance from her long-simmering well of resentment. This one, she articulated, her finger hovering over the first vial, is for that wretched birthday party one you effectively ruined when your glucose plummeted. Forcing everyone's attention away from my special day, transforming it into another one of your medical dramas. And this one, she continued, her voice growing colder, is for that summer vacation, the one we'd all been looking forward to, which, predictably, spiraled into a week-long saga entirely focused on your medical needs, your dietary restrictions, your constant monitoring. My enjoyment, naturally, was an afterthought, and finally, this particular vial, she declared, her tone tinged with a deep, enduring bitterness, represents every single night our mother, with her gentle hand and worried brow, would tiptoe into your room to check on your breathing, to ensure your safety, while I lay awake in my own bed. Longing for even a fleeting moment of that same devoted concern, it was a raw, visceral expression of years of perceived maternal favoritism. With a chilling sense of purpose, she flicked a switch, and the garbage disposal beneath the sink rumbled to life, its mechanical hum a sinister overture to the impending destruction. She held the first vial, that symbol of my ruined birthday, directly over the hungry maw of the whoring blades, her gaze fixed intently on my face, searching for a reaction. But my consciousness was now a fractured landscape. Her features, though twisted with a malevolent triumph, were becoming indistinct, blurred at the edges, almost irrelevant. The familiar kitchen, with its everyday objects, had begun to warp and shimmer, taking on a surreal, almost dreamlike quality, as if I were peering at it through thick, distorted glass. The very fabric of reality seemed to unravel, leaving nothing tangible or genuine except the agonizing, infernal burning sensation that coursed like liquid fire through my veins, and the suffocating, desperate, primal need for even a single, unobstructed breath. Then, with a cold, deliberate movement, she released her grip. The delicate glass vial tumbled into the churning depths of the disposal, instantly annihilated. A violent, sickening grinding sound, sharp and unforgiving, echoed for what felt like an eternity, though it lasted only a few agonizing seconds. In that brief, brutal interval, thousands of dollars worth of life-saving medication, the very antithesis of her destructive intent, had been utterly obliterated, reduced to worthless fragments. Without a moment's pause, as if performing a grim, ritualistic sacrifice, she picked up the next vial, then the one after that. Each successive act of destruction was meticulously punctuated by another bitter complaint, another festering grievance dredged from the depths of her long-held resentment. Each shattered vial represented not just medication, but another perceived instance where she had been sidelined, another moment where she felt utterly overlooked. Invisible in the shadow of my illness. Now, an ominous quiet settled over the counter. Only the precious vials remained, two slender testaments to a rapidly diminishing hope, standing sentinel over the debris of their predecessors. My body, now a battlefield ravaged by internal warfare, was racked by violent, uncontrollable convulsions. My muscles, screaming in protest, cramped excruciatingly, seized by the dual assault of severe dehydration and a critical, life-threatening electrolyte imbalance. It was a terrifying, visceral manifestation of my system shutting down. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, the searing pain, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, managed to slice through the dense, obfuscating fog that had enveloped my consciousness. It was a brutal, unwelcome clarity. Jade, meanwhile, observed my tormented struggle with a chilling, almost clinical detachment, her eyes devoid of empathy, registering my agony with the dispassionate curiosity of a scientist studying a specimen. This violent, uncontrolled spasming was a symptom she hadn't encountered in her extensive research into diabetes, a stark departure from the carefully curated, often exaggerated performances of illness she might have witnessed or read about. The brutal, unvarnished reality of real suffering, she seemed to realize, was a far cry from the calculated, theatrical mimicry she had perhaps envisioned for herself. She knelt beside me once more, her presence a cold, unwelcome shadow. In her hand, clutched with renewed purpose, were the final vials, their existence a fragile, fleeting offer of reprieve, or perhaps a final cruel twist of the knife. Her bargaining terms, dramatically altered by the terrifying proximity of my demise and the intrusion of the outside world, had shifted. The demand for a full, self-incriminating confession, that twisted validation of her imagined victimhood, had evaporated. Now, her desperation was palpable. All she required was my solemn, silent agreement to keep her horrifying actions a secret, to bury the truth of her malice deep within myself, never to resurface. She would be free to craft whatever fictional narrative she desired, to rewrite history as it suited her warped perception, without fear of contradiction from me. In return for my absolute silence, my complicity in her deception, I would be granted a sufficient, life-saving dose of insulin, just enough, she implied, to pull me back from the brink of death, but likely not enough to fully regain my strength or autonomy, keeping me under her lingering influence. I attempted, with what felt like the last vestiges of my mental capacity, to grasp the terrifying implications of her revised offer, to string her words into a coherent thought. But my brain, deprived of the vital glucose it so desperately craved, felt like a crumbling edifice. My thoughts, once linear and logical, now scattered like wisps of smoke in a violent gale, impossible to pin down, utterly beyond my control. My brain, the very seat of my consciousness, was literally starving, a parched desert unable to access the life-giving glucose it needed to function. The intricate network of neural pathways, responsible for every thought, every sensation, every memory, now misfired erratically, like faulty electrical circuits, unable to communicate effectively. My perception of reality itself had fractured, splintering into a series of stark, disconnected, intensely vivid vignettes. Jade's contorted face, looming unnervingly close, the two remaining insulin vials glistening ominously. The glint of the knife, a constant, chilling presence. And the relentless, almost audible ticking of an unseen clock, counting down the precious seconds of my life. Impatient, and perhaps sensing my increasing detachment, she abruptly seized my shoulders, her grip tight and bruising, and began to shake me violently. My head, a heavy, inert weight, lolled from side to side with sickening uselessness, a macabre puppet no longer controlled by its strings. I was a vessel emptying, incapable of response. The terrifying truth must have dawned on her with chilling clarity. She was losing me. Not just my attention, but my very grip on life. The color draining from my face, the unresponsiveness of my body, the vacant stare in my eyes were unmistakable signs of a life rapidly ebbing away, and she, with her self-proclaimed medical expertise, knew it instinctively. Her meticulously orchestrated plan, predicated on a controlled, predictable decline, was now violently unraveling before her eyes. She had gravely miscalculated, underestimating the relentless, brutal speed with which diabetic ketoacidosis could seize a body. How swiftly and violently the delicate machinery of human physiology could break down under its merciless assault. My accelerated deterioration was a damning indictment of her amateurish, cruel misjudgment. Then another sound, sharper and more insistent than the doorbell, pierced the oppressive silence, the cheerful, yet utterly terrifying, melody of my phone ringing upstairs. It was the specific, personalized ringtone I had assigned to Mom, a melody that usually brought comfort, but now heralded a fresh wave of panic, a potential death knell for Jade's crumbling scheme. The phone rang for agonizing times, each chime reverberating through the house like a hammer blow, before falling silent, consigning the call to the impersonal abyss of voicemail. A temporary reprieve, perhaps, but a ticking time bomb nonetheless. For the first time, Jade's face was etched with a raw, visceral fear that seemed to strip away all pretense. Her calculated composure shattered, replaced by an expression of genuine terror. The implication was clear, stark, and terrifying. If our parents were actively trying to reach us, a subtle shift in their plans, a growing concern, could mean an early return. A catastrophic disruption to her timeline, catching her in the act of her monstrous deed. Cornered, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her, she made a desperate, high-stakes decision, a gambit born of sheer terror and self-preservation, a radical pivot from her earlier murderous intent. With shaking hands, she retrieved one of the last remaining vials, its clear liquid in stark contrast to the chaos enveloping us. With a newfound urgency, born of her own rapidly escalating panic, she drew up a significant, proper dose of insulin into the syringe. No longer was it the minuscule, almost mocking amount she had initially administered, designed merely to string me along. This was a dose calculated to genuinely intervene, to wrestle my body back from the precipice, to actually help. Her new, frantic strategy was chillingly clear. She would administer this crucial shot, stabilizing my dangerously plummeting vital signs, pulling me back to a state of fragile coherence. Once I was lucid enough to comprehend and, more importantly, agree, she would then ruthlessly extract my vow of silence, my absolute complicity in her monstrous act, before any further intervention could occur. It was a race against time, a desperate attempt to regain control before she lost everything. The sharp prick of the needle pierced the skin of my arm, a fleeting sensation against the backdrop of my overwhelming pain. I felt the cold, alien presence of the insulin begin its slow, arduous journey into my dying, starved tissues, a desperate prayer in liquid form. But even this life-saving intervention wouldn't be instantaneous. She knew, with her superficial understanding of medicine, that it would be a cruel waiting game, perhaps 20 agonizing minutes before any discernible improvement, any tangible sign of recovery, could be expected, 20 minutes during which anything could still go wrong. Jade, now a steady intense anticipation, slumped back slightly, her gaze fixed on me, waiting for the first signs of the insulin's effect. She still clutched the very last vial, a final, desperate insurance policy, a contingency should her plan hit another snag. Or should I prove unresponsive? But with an almost tragic inevitability, she had miscalculated yet again, utterly failing to anticipate the next, immediate complication that was already unfolding. As if summoned by her anxious thoughts, the doorbell chimed once more, its sound now a harbinger of imminent doom. But this time, the voice that called out through the closed door sent a fresh wave of ice through Jade's veins. It was unmistakably familiar, the slightly nasal, yet inherently kind, tones of Mrs. Buford, our perpetually vigilant next-door neighbor, her voice laced with a gentle, yet persistent, concern. "Hello, is everything all right in there?" She called out, her voice carrying an unexpected weight of inquiry. Mrs. Buford, ever observant, had apparently witnessed the delivery driver's hasty departure, a detail that likely struck her as unusual. Her keen eyes had also undoubtedly registered the absence of our parents' car in the driveway, a potent combination of circumstances that had understandably sparked her neighborly concern, triggering a deep-seated worrying about two young girls being left alone during a holiday weekend. Jade froze, a statue of pure, unadulterated terror. Her face, already pale, now seemed to drain of all remaining color. She knew Mrs. Buford's reputation all too well. This wasn't a casual passerby. This was Mrs. Buford, the quintessential neighborhood watch matriarch, a woman famed for her delectable homemade cookies, her unwavering commitment to checking on everyone, her almost uncanny ability to sense when something was even slightly amiss. She was, in short, the absolute worst possible person to appear at their door at this critical juncture. No, Mrs. Buford would not be easily dissuaded. Her concern was genuine, her persistence legendary. Simply claiming everything's fine wouldn't be enough to send her away. She would probe, she would question, she would undoubtedly wait until her neighborly anxieties were fully assuaged. Her voice, warm yet insistent, filtered clearly through the closed door, adding another layer of innocent yet potent pressure. "I just brought over some leftover pumpkin pie from Thanksgiving," she announced cheerfully, unwittingly weaponizing a gesture of kindness, ensuring that her presence wouldn't be easily dismissed. Who could turn away delicious pie, especially from Mrs. Buford? A surge of desperate, adrenaline-fueled energy coursed through my veins, spurring me to act. I tried, with every fiber of my being, to call out, to scream, to make any sound that would alert Mrs. Buford to the horrifying truth unfolding within. But my throat, dry and constricted, could only manage a pitiful, weak moan, a barely audible, gasping whimper that was swallowed by the oppressive silence of the room. In a blur of desperate motion, Jade was instantly beside me, her hand clamping brutally over my mouth, stifling any further sound. Her palms, I could feel even through the haze of my agony, were slick with cold, clammy sweat, a testament to the sheer, unadulterated panic that had now consumed her. Her eyes, wide and wild, silently pleaded with me to remain silent, a desperate, unspoken threat hanging in the air. Outside, Mrs. Buford's patience, though considerable, was clearly wearing thin. She knocked again, this time with a more insistent, harder rhythm, the sound echoing ominously through the house, a testament to her growing unease. Her voice, now tinged with a distinct edge of concern, carried clearly through the door. "I'm getting really worried, girls," she called out, her tone sharper, more urgent. "If you don't answer, I might have to call your parents." This was no longer a polite inquiry. It was an ultimatum, a direct and devastating threat to Jade's last remaining shreds of control. That specific, terrifying threat snapped Jade out of her frozen panic. The thought of Mrs. Buford, whose words carried undeniable weight, contacting our parents, rousing their suspicion and potentially alerting them to rush home, was an unbearable prospect. It would mean the complete, utter collapse of her entire meticulously planned deception, revealing her monstrous actions to the very people she sought to manipulate. With a desperate, almost pathetic attempt at regaining composure, she stood, her hands nervously smoothing down her hair, as if tidiness could somehow mask the rage and chaos within. Her walk to the door, though still too brisk, was now imbued with a feigned nonchalance, an actress preparing for the performance of her life. Her voice, when she finally spoke through the closed door, was a strained, high-pitched parody of cheerfulness, though a telltale tremor betrayed her inner turmoil. "Oh, Mrs. Buford," she chirped, trying to sound genuinely surprised. "We're perfectly fine, really. Just enjoying the holiday, sleeping in a bit later than usual. You know how it is." But Mrs. Buford, with her innate sense of observation and well-honed intuition, was clearly not convinced by Jade's flimsy performance. Her voice, now even more insistent, cut through Jade's flimsy excuses. "Well, I'm glad to hear that, dear," she said, her tone implying polite skepticism. "But I was wondering if I could just pop in for a moment, just to see my name. You know how I'm worrying about her diabetes, and I haven't seen her out and about in the yard today like she usually is. She's usually such an early bird." Jade, now visibly flustered, stumbled over a series of increasingly transparent excuses, each one thinner than the last, digging herself deeper into the hole of her deception. But with every strange justification, Mrs. Buford's voice grew steadily more concerned, her natural warmth hardening into an unmistakable tone of deep suspicion. The conversation at the door stretched on, an agonizing, drawn-out dance of polite deception and mounting suspicion. I could almost feel the suspicion, like a cold tendril insidiously creeping into Mrs. Buford's voice, each polite query carrying an unspoken accusation. Jade, meanwhile, was visibly floundering, her words tumbling out too quickly, her explanations growing increasingly elaborate and unconvincing, a classic tale of someone desperately trying to cover a lie. Miraculously, agonizingly slowly, the life-saving insulin was finally beginning its arduous work within my ravaged system. The dense, oppressive fog that had enveloped my mind began to thin, ever so slightly, allowing fleeting glimpses of clarity, brief moments where my thoughts felt marginally less scattered, less hopelessly fractured. A desperate, primal urgency surged through me. I needed to make noise, any noise. Something, anything, that would pierce the carefully constructed facade Jade was presenting, that would alert Mrs. Buford to the horrifying truth. With a monumental, almost superhuman effort, leveraging what little strength the insulin had begun to restore, I stretched out my hand, my fingers clumsily grasping for the water glass that stood precariously on the kitchen counter, just within reach. With a final, desperate shove, I sent it tumbling. The glass struck the unforgiving tile floor with a violent, ear-splitting crash, shattering into 1,000 glistening shards, the sharp, undeniable sound echoing deafeningly through the deceptively quiet house. The sound was utterly unmistakably too loud, too sharp, too violent to be anything innocent. Outside, Mrs. Buford's voice, now stripped of all polite pretense, rose sharply, demanding, "What was that? What on earth just happened in there?" Her tone was no longer merely concerned. It was openly accusatory, laced with an undeniable edge of fear. Jade, her face now a mask of pure terror, immediately launched into another frantic, transparent fabrication, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Oh, nothing, Mrs. Buford, just my name dropping a pot or something in the kitchen. She's a bit clumsy sometimes, you know. Everything's absolutely fine, perfectly all right," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. But the sheer force of the shattering glass, the undeniable sound of chaos, had already irrevocably punctured her fragile illusion. Mrs. Buford, standing resolute at the threshold, clearly wasn't buying it this time. The door, I sensed, was about to swing open, revealing the horrific truth. She had, after all, raised 3 children from infancy to adulthood, navigating their myriad childhood ailments, teenage dramas, and quiet struggles. This profound experience had cultivated in her an almost supernatural intuition, a sixth sense for when something was genuinely, irrevocably wrong beyond the usual youthful indiscretions. Her voice, usually soft and laced with grandmotherly warmth, now cut through the tense silence, resonating with an undeniable firmness. She announced, not as a casual suggestion, but as an unwavering declaration, that she was dialing 911, the ultimate, non-negotiable escalation if Jade didn't unlatch the front door completely and allow her eyes to fully ascertain my condition. This wasn't an empty threat, Mrs. Buford, as everyone in the neighborhood knew, didn't bluff. Her promises were as solid as the oak trees lining the street, and her threats, even more so. Jade retreated into the kitchen, a whirlwind of frantic energy. Her carefully constructed facade, her intricate web of deceit, was visibly crumbling around her like an ill-fated house of cards caught in a sudden gust. How could she possibly allow Mrs. Buford to summon emergency services, thereby exposing everything? Yet, paradoxically, how could she permit anyone, let alone the perceptive Mrs. Buford, to witness me in such a profoundly compromised, debilitated state, my body screaming silent alarms? Her gaze, darting desperately, landed on the last remaining insulin vial. Small, unassuming, yet holding the very essence of my survival, she snatched it up, cradling it in her palm like a desperate gambler's last, invaluable bargaining chip. Her voice dropped to a low, venomous hiss, a sound barely audible yet piercingly clear in its malice. "You have one chance," she spat, her eyes narrowed to slits. I was to tell Mrs. Buford that I was perfectly fine, merely feeling a little queasy from something I'd mistakenly eaten, and that she should simply leave. A simple lie, a crucial dismissal. If I dared to utter even a single word outside this script, she vowed she would shatter that precious, life-saving vial and vanish into thin air before any help could conceivably arrive. I would be left alone, utterly defenseless, to grapple with the terrifying task of explaining my own agonizing death. Fortunately, the small dose of insulin I'd already received was, albeit slowly, beginning its miraculous work. The thick, suffocating fog that had enveloped my mind was gradually dissipating, pulling my thoughts back from their scattered, chaotic wanderings into something resembling coherence. However, my body remained an unresponsive, leaden weight, stubbornly refusing to cooperate with my returning mental clarity. Through the kitchen wall, I could distinctly hear Mrs. Buford's escalating threats, punctuated by the unmistakable jingle of a key. She possessed a spare key to our house, a sign of her long-standing trust and connection with our family, given to her by our parents years ago for just such emergencies. With a sudden, rough tug, Jade pulled me to my feet, her desperate strength supporting the majority of my now almost unbearable weight. We stumbled, a grotesque, lurching dance of captor and captive, toward the front door. All the while, her final, chilling threats were whispered directly into my ear, her breath hot against my skin. "One wrong word," she hissed, "and the last vial is gone forever." She'd already crafted her alibi, a cruel narrative she would claim I had, in a fit of uncontrolled anger. recklessly destroyed my own insulin supply. The door finally opened, a hesitant crack. Through the narrow gap, Mrs. Buford's face, etched deep with apprehension, appeared. Her eyes, sharp and immediately perceptive, instantly locked onto mine, conducting a rapid, silent assessment. They took in every damning detail, my ghostly pale skin, the frantic, labored heaving of my chest, and the undeniable, stark distress radiating from my entire being. Her expression, previously just worried, visibly hardened, transforming into a mask of grim, resolute concern. I opened my mouth, a monumental effort in itself. The words that emerged, however, surprised everyone, not least of all me, in a voice that was undeniably weak, yet surprisingly clear. I inquired if she still happened to have any of that special herbal tea from her meticulously tended garden, the one she often lauded for its powerful anti-nausea properties. Mrs. Buford's eyes, already keen, narrowed further, betraying a flicker of profound recognition. She had known me, after all, since I was a mere 5-year-old child, a small figure often trailing her through those very same garden paths. She knew, with absolute certainty, that I despised tea, particularly her notoriously bitter herbal concoctions. Yet, without missing a beat, she played along with my unexpected charade, her voice adopting an almost theatrical cheerfulness. "Of course, dear," she exclaimed, a swift countermove in this unspoken game of strategy. "I'll go fetch some right away. Be back in 5 minutes flat." Jade, momentarily lulled into a false sense of security, began to close the door, a wave of palpable relief washing over her. But Mrs. Buford's sturdy foot, with unexpected agility, shot out, firmly blocking the closing panel. Her gaze, now intensely direct, pierced through me. "And tell me, have you checked your blood sugar recently?" she asked, her voice calm but loaded with an undeniable subtext. It was a deceptively simple question, yet it was heavy, pregnant with the weight of her profound understanding. She knew the unmistakable, harrowing signs of a diabetic crisis as intimately as she knew the names of her grandchildren. Indeed, watching Mrs. Buford, who had merely come bearing a comforting pie, suddenly activate her latent, formidable detective skills was like witnessing someone's beloved grandma metamorphose into a veritable Sherlock Holmes before your very eyes. She possessed an uncanny ability to discern that hollow, where fine voice from 3 blocks away, a trained ear for the subtle nuances of deceit. I managed a weak nod, continuing the desperate lie that everything was fine. But even as the falsehood left my lips, my left hand, almost instinctively, drifted to my pocket, the familiar, comforting location where I always, habitually, kept my glucose meter. The gesture was fleeting, almost imperceptible, yet it was undeniably deliberate, an unconscious plea. And then the chilling, stark reality, an empty pocket, a telltale absence, no meter. Mrs. Buford's face underwent a profound, instantaneous transformation. The last vestiges of a kindly neighbor vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. She understood. Without uttering another word, she announced, her voice deliberately loud enough for Jade to plainly hear, that she would indeed retrieve the tea. And oh yes, she would also call my parents to inform them I wasn't feeling well. Jade, startled, began to protest vehemently, but Mrs. Buford was already pivoting, already walking away, her pace surprisingly brisk, far faster than her 70 years should realistically allow. There was no doubt in her mind, she knew, with terrifying certainty, that something was terribly, irrevocably wrong. Jade slammed the door shut, the resounding thud echoing like a final gavel. Any semblance of her earlier cold, calculating composure evaporated, replaced by an incandescent rage. Her meticulously constructed world was not merely crumbling. It was shattering, violently imploding around her. She had mere minutes, precious, dwindling seconds, before Mrs. Buford either called 911 or, perhaps even worse for Jade, our parents. Quite possibly both. The game, with all its cruel twists and turns, was definitively over. With a surge of frustrated fury, she dragged me back into the kitchen, her grip bruising, and shoved me roughly against the cold, unforgiving counter. The last insulin vial, a tiny, fragile cylinder containing the very essence of my life, reappeared from her pocket. She held it, a chilling emblem of destruction, directly over the gaping maw of the garbage disposal. One final, desperate time. Her logic, twisted by desperation, was stark. If she was going down, collapsing into the abyss of her own making, then she would, with grim resolve, take me with her. Mutual destruction, a Pyrrhic victory perhaps, but preferable to the bitter taste of utter defeat. But the insulin, slowly but surely, was doing its work. A surprising surge of mental clarity, a flicker of tactical brilliance, ignited within me. My mind, now sharp enough to formulate a desperate defense, reminded her, my voice gaining a newfound, albeit shaky, strength, that destroying this final vial would leave her with an impossible task, explaining my inevitable death. No concocted story, no matter how elaborate, could possibly cover that. The logical conclusion, I pressed, was prison. Real prison, a cold, harsh institution, not merely the uncomfortable family consequences she might have imagined. She hesitated, her grip on the vial faltering, a crucial crack appearing in her iron resolve. Sensing this momentary weakness, I pressed on, words now flowing with unexpected ease and conviction. If she gave me the insulin, I proposed, I would tell everyone a fabricated tale, that I had accidentally, foolishly, destroyed my own supply, a stupid mistake made while half asleep and disoriented. She could then, I explained, corroborate this narrative, playing the part of the distraught hero who had rushed to my aid, guiding me through the terrifying crisis. Our parents, blinded by gratitude for her help, would undoubtedly forgive her previous web of lies. The offer, a lifeline disguised as a surrender, hung heavy in the air between us, shimmering with possibility. Jade's mind raced, calculating the odds with a desperate, chilling speed. She could now distinctly hear Mrs. Buford's voice from outside, likely already on her phone, setting the wheels of intervention into motion. Time was rapidly, brutally running out. She faced an ultimate, binary choice. Either commit fully to my complete destruction, or salvage whatever meager scraps she could from the wreckage of her failed plan. Then, faint but unmistakably growing louder, the chilling wail of sirens pierced the suburban quiet. Mrs. Buford, true to her word, had not waited. Help was coming, inexorably, unstoppably. Jade's small window for decision was slamming shut with each accelerating beat of her frantic heart. Her eyes darted, a desperate tango between the vial in her hand, my defiant, hopeful gaze, and the unyielding front door. She made her choice. With a sudden, violent motion, the vial flew across the room, an arc of crystalline malice, smashing against the far wall with a sharp, sickening crack. Glass shards, like tiny, malevolent diamonds, and the precious, life-giving insulin splattered across the kitchen floor, mingling with the dust and detritus. The last of my salvation, my precious hope, was utterly destroyed in one devastating, spiteful moment. Jade, her face a mask of cold triumph, actually smiled. If she couldn't win, she seemed to convey, then neither of us would. But I, in turn, smiled back, a secret, knowing smile that chilled her to the core. Because during our earlier struggle, during the chaotic moments when she'd been distracted by the formidable presence of Mrs. Buford, I had executed a small, subtle maneuver she hadn't noticed. The syringe she'd used before, the one still containing a partial precious dose, had rolled just out of sight beneath the counter. As she'd roughly dragged me toward the front door, I had, with a desperate surge of adrenaline and a whispered prayer, scooped it up. There was still a residual amount of insulin within its slender barrel, not much, perhaps 2 precious units, but enough, I knew, to sustain me. To keep the fragile flame of life flickering until help finally arrived. I had cunningly hidden it in my waistband, its cool presence a tiny, defiant secret against my skin, waiting for this precise, opportune moment. Now, as the wail of the sirens intensified, swelling into a crescendo of impending intervention, I pulled it out. With trembling but resolute hands, I injected the remaining dose. Jade's face, a moment ago triumphant, went stark white, the blood draining from it as if by a sudden, invisible siphon. She hadn't, after all, destroyed everything. Her final, cruel act of vengeance had failed, spectacularly. She bolted, a desperate, panicked sprint toward the back door, but it was already too late. Red and blue lights, a beacon of justice and rescue, were already flashing rhythmically through the kitchen windows, painting the chaotic scene in an urgent, pulsating glow. Mrs. Buford, with unwavering precision, had given them our exact address. The front door burst open with a forceful shove, paramedics in their unmistakable uniforms surging through, their movements swift and purposeful. Mrs. Buford, her expression a mix of fierce concern and quiet triumph, was right behind them, spare key still clutched firmly in her hand. They found me sprawled on the kitchen floor, conscious but terribly weak, a pathetic figure amidst the glittering shards of broken glass and the scattered, destroyed medical supplies that painted a vivid picture of the ordeal. Jade stood frozen by the back door, a statue of terror, utterly paralyzed between the futile instinct to flee and the terrifying inevitability of facing the consequences. The minutes that followed blurred into a chaotic, overwhelming sensory assault. Paramedics, their movements a synchronized ballet of urgency, efficiently checked my vitals, expertly started 4 lines, and administered emergency dextrose, pumping much-needed glucose into my system. Police officers arrived, their authoritative presence cutting through the tumult, taking in the scene with trained, observant eyes. Mrs. Buford, her voice clear and unwavering despite the emotional weight of it all, recounted everything she had witnessed. Jade, in a pathetic, desperate last gasp, attempted to spin intricate tales, but her flimsy narratives quickly unraveled, collapsing under the weight of basic, pointed questioning. My blood sugar, under the expert care, slowly, gradually stabilized. The immediate, terrifying danger had finally passed, though the paramedics made it clear I would need comprehensive hospital monitoring. As they carefully loaded me onto the stretcher, preparing to transport me to the waiting ambulance. On the gurney, the stark white of the ambulance ceiling blurred above me as I overheard Jade's voice, surprisingly steady, telling the officers a fabricated tale that I, in a fit of anger, had destroyed my own life-saving insulin. But the cold, hard evidence, laid out like a grisly still life, painted an entirely different, chilling picture. The glint of the kitchen knife she'd used to threaten me, its blade reflecting the harsh, overhead lights, still lay ominously on the speckled quartz counter. And then there was the video, a perverse piece of documentation she'd recorded on her own phone, capturing not just my increasingly desperate, deteriorating condition as my blood sugar soared, but also her cruel demands, her deliberate inaction, her palpable satisfaction. The utter devastation in the kitchen's shattered glass, puddles of sticky liquid, the mangled insulin vials with their precious, life-sustaining contents now tragically wasted, all screamed a clear, undeniable narrative of what had truly transpired in those agonizing minutes. Our parents arrived, their faces etched with frantic worrying, just as the ambulance doors were about to close, sealing me inside. I watched Mom's expression morph, a sickeningly slow transition from confused concern for what might have happened to absolute gut-wrenching horror as the officers, their voices low but firm, outlined the grim findings of their investigation. Dad, usually the more vocal one, stood utterly silent, a rigid pillar of disbelief, his mind visibly struggling to process the monumental, catastrophic extent to which they had fundamentally misread the entire, escalating situation. How could they have been so blind? They had, in their unwitting way, fostered and enabled Jade's festering jealousy, allowing it to grow unchecked, until it had nearly, irrevocably killed me. The air in the hospital room hung heavy, thick with the pervasive, antiseptic scent of disinfectant, barely masking the faint, bitter aroma of stale coffee. My gaze drifted to the forepool, mesmerized by the steady, rhythmic drip of the clear fluid entering my arm, each precious drop carrying the insulin my body so desperately craved. A stark contrast to the deliberate deprivation I had just endured. The paramedics, with their quick, decisive actions, had managed to stabilize me during the frantic ride in the ambulance, pulling me back from the precipice. But the doctors, ever vigilant, insisted on monitoring my volatile system for at least 24 hours. My blood sugar readings, a jagged, terrifying graph, vividly illustrated the violent, perilous swings from the past few harrowing hours, serving as irrefutable evidence of precisely how perilously close I had come to slipping into an irreversible diabetic coma. Mom sat slumped in the chair beside my bed, her face puffy and stained from the torrent of terror she'd shed. She had been apologizing relentlessly, a continuous stream of choked whispers and anguished self-recrimination, ever since she'd arrived at the hospital. But I was simply too physically and emotionally exhausted to even nod, let alone utter a response. Dad, a restless shadow of his usual self, paced relentlessly by the window, his gaze occasionally snagging on the anonymous cars in the parking lot below, as if searching for an answer amidst the mundane. Neither of them had dared to utter Jade's name since the police had escorted her away, the silence a heavy, unspoken acknowledgement of the rupture. A nurse, efficient and gentle, bustled in to check my vitals. With practiced precision, she adjusted the insulin drip, fine-tuning it based on my latest glucose reading, then quietly departed, leaving us once again enveloped in a suffocating silence. The steady, insistent beep-beep-beep of the monitors on the wall seemed to amplify, filling the cavernous void where conversation should have been. A constant reminder of the fragile balance of my life. My throat still felt raw, abraded from the violent retching, and every single muscle in my body protested with a deep, persistent ache, a testament to the severe, dangerous dehydration I had suffered. Then, a familiar, comforting presence appeared in the doorway, Mrs. Buford, our kind neighbor from across the street. She clutched a small potted plant, a sprig of defiant green life, in her hands. She had changed out of her morning robe into proper, albeit still crumpled, day clothes, but her face, pale and drawn, still bore the undeniable strain and shock of the morning's horrific events. Mom rose instantly, stumbling into a tearful embrace, fresh thoughts bubbling to the surface. They spoke in hushed, conspiratorial tones near the door, their voices barely audible, while I, utterly spent, simply pretended to be asleep, seeking refuge in feigned unconsciousness. The detective arrived an hour later, his presence a jarring intrusion into the hospital's hushed tranquility. He was surprisingly younger than I had anticipated, with kind, discerning eyes and a calming, gentle manner that immediately put me at ease. He pulled up a chair, its legs scraping softly on the linoleum, and asked, his voice low and considerate, if I felt well enough to give a statement. Mom, ever protective, began to protest, but I shook my head a quiet, firm defiance. I simply nodded. The story, in all its brutal, agonizing detail, needed to be told, and told now, while the memories were still searingly fresh and untainted by the passage of time. I walked him through every single terrifying moment, starting from the chilling discovery of my utterly empty insulin pump, a death sentence waiting to unfold, all the way to Jade's final, destructive, near-fatal act. He listened intently, his pen scratching meticulously across his notepad, occasionally pausing to ask for a crucial clarification, a specific detail. When I recounted the part about the video Jade had so arrogantly recorded on her phone, he made a special, emphatic note, his gaze sharpening. That evidence, he stated with quiet certainty, will be absolutely crucial. He then calmly and professionally explained the next steps, the grim legal machinery that had already begun to turn. Jade, he informed us, was being held on grave charges of reckless endangerment, a charge that chillingly reflected the direct threat to my life and destruction of property. He elaborated, explaining that the sheer monetary value of the insulin she had deliberately destroyed, coupled with the heinous act of willfully withholding life-saving medication, elevated the crime to a felony. She faced truly serious consequences, potentially years behind bars. Finally, he asked the pivotal question, his gaze steady on mine. Do you wish to press charges? I looked from his kind, professional face to my parents, their visages utterly devastated, ravaged by guilt and grief, seeing their pain, and feeling my own. I nodded again, a silent, painful affirmation. After he departed, the silence that settled upon the room was even heavier, more oppressive than before, thick with the weight of our shared tragedy and the agonizing decision I had just made. Dad, finally ceasing his relentless pacing, sank into the other armchair, his shoulders slumping. He reached for my hand, his callous fingers, usually so strong and steady, trembling ever so slightly as he squeezed mine gently. Mom moved from her chair, easing herself onto the edge of my bed, her movements careful, almost reverent, not to disturb the delicate foreline running into my arm. Then, in jumbled, broken words, frequently interrupted by fresh tears and long, agonizing pauses, they began to confess. They spoke of finding Jade's diary months ago, filled with venomous, obsessive entries about me, but dismissing it as mere teenage dramatics, a fleeting phase. They recounted the numerous, increasingly urgent warning signs they had so tragically ignored, choosing instead to believe Jade's elaborate performances of innocence, willfully averting their gaze from the ugly, undeniable truth festering beneath the surface. They spoke of how profoundly they had failed both their daughters, albeit in vastly different, devastating ways. A social worker visited next, her demeanor calm and professional. She was an older woman, her gray hair neatly pulled back into a practical bun, her expression one of quiet, compassionate efficiency. She asked probing, yet necessary questions about my home situation, specifically if I felt safe returning there. The question struck me as absurd, almost laughable, after everything that had transpired, but I understood it was merely protocol, a necessary step. Before leaving, she placed a stack of pamphlets on my bedside table, brochures detailing family counseling services and support groups specifically designed for families grappling with the insidious trauma of medical abuse, a somber testament to the gravity of my ordeal. Later that evening, Dr. Rollins, my endocrinologist since my initial diagnosis, arrived for her rounds. Her familiar, reassuring face brought an unexpected, profound comfort amidst the sterile clinical environment. She meticulously reviewed my chart, her brow furrowed in concentration, then thoughtfully adjusted my insulin regimen, tailoring it to account for the immense physical and emotional trauma my body had so violently endured. She gently warned me that the profound stress I had experienced could potentially wreak havoc on my blood sugar control for weeks, if not months to come, necessitating even closer, more vigilant monitoring. Night truly fell outside the window, painting the world in shades of inky black. The hospital cafeteria had long since closed its doors, but Dad, ever practical and desperate to feel useful, managed to track down some vending machines in a forgotten corner of the hospital. He returned, his arms laden with an assortment of sugary snacks and bags of chips, a poignant, almost childlike attempt to nurture me. I managed to chew on a few dry crackers, my stomach still churning with the lingering nausea and unease from the day's harrowing ordeal. Mom's phone, however, seemed to ring constantly, an incessant symphony of anxious inquiries. Family members, having caught wind of the terrible news through the grapevine, were calling ceaselessly. She eventually stepped out into the hallway to field the calls, her voice muffled and indistinct through the closed door. Still, I caught fragments whispers about Jade, about the charges, about the crushing uncertainty of not knowing what would happen next. Each hushed conversation seemed to drain even more precious energy from her already depleted reserves. The night nurse who took over was different, older, perhaps, and noticeably more businesslike in her approach. With practiced, almost detached efficiency, she checked my blood sugar every 2 hours, pricking my fingers with a quick, decisive movement. Slowly, agonizingly, the numbers began to stabilize, my body gradually, tentatively returning to its normal, pre-trauma patterns. Without a word, she brought extra blankets, her perceptive eyes recognizing the deep, bone-chilling cold that often accompanies recovery from severe DKA. I drifted in and out of a fitful, restless sleep between the regular blood sugar checks. Every single time I closed my eyes, the horrific image seared itself onto the inside of my eyelids, Jade, her face cold and impassive, holding those precious insulin vials directly over the gaping maw of the garbage disposal. The sickening, grinding sound of their destruction echoed not only in my memory but in my dreams, vivid and terrifying. I would wake with a sudden, sharp gasp, my heart pounding, utterly convinced that the dreaded, insistent beep 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 of my insulin pump signaling an empty reservoir was ringing in my ears again. In those moments, Mom, always nearby, would gently squeeze my hand, her touch a silent anchor, pulling me back to the safety of the hospital room, reminding me where I truly was. Morning brought with it a fresh rotation of doctors, and with them, new discussions about discharge planning. A psychiatrist, they explained, was a mandatory consultation, given what they had unequivocally classified as a traumatic event. She asked a series of careful, probing questions about my mental state, meticulously screening for any nascent signs of post-traumatic stress. I answered honestly, laying bare the persistent nightmares that haunted my sleep, the gnawing anxiety about the security of my insulin supply, the insidious fear that, despite everything, had not quite faded. Physical therapy followed, an unexpected but necessary step. The severe dehydration had left me far weaker than anyone had anticipated, my muscles atrophied and protesting. The therapist, patient and encouraging, helped me take tentative steps along the hospital corridors, slowly, painstakingly rebuilding my strength. My legs trembled with each hesitant step, my muscles screaming in protest after their ordeal. But she assured me this was normal, a natural part of recovery, that healing would. It took what felt like an eternity, but finally, things began to move forward. A uniformed pharmacy technician, pushing a discreet cart, arrived at my bedside with my new insulin supply, delivering it directly to the room. The pharmacist, a kindly woman with meticulous glasses, carefully unboxed the new supply. She held each precious vial to the light, her finger tracing the labels as she systematically confirmed the dosage, the X number, and, most critically, the expiration date, a ritualistic verification that felt profoundly significant, like an affirmation of life itself. My mother, a sentinel of silent worrying, tracked every one of my movements. Her hand, a pale, trembling shadow, hovered just inches from the pharmacy bag, an unspoken plea, an instinctive gesture as if her mere presence, her proximity, could somehow shield this vital medication from any further threat. My father, ever the pragmatist, cut through the tension with a low, thoughtful question. Should we look into getting a lockbox for these when we get home? A secure place for storage. The suggestion hung in the air. A stark reminder of the new, unsettling precautions now necessary for our lives. A bitter irony gnawed at me. What twisted narrative was Jade constructing for herself, right this moment, within the sterile confines of her holding cell? Was she playing the victim, or perhaps concocting another elaborate fiction, while we her family were left sifting through the shattered fragments of her explosive recklessness, piecing together a semblance of normalcy from the wreckage she'd left behind? Her panicked flight, the moment the wail of approaching sirens pierced the night, spoke volumes. It was a stark, damning indictment of her impulsiveness, a testament to the shocking lack of foresight or genuine planning that underpinned this entire, desperate scheme. A spontaneous, destructive outburst, rather than a calculated act. As the noon sun filtered weakly through the blinds, painting stripes across the sterile floor, the practicalities of discharge planning began. A poised case manager, her voice calm and measured, meticulously outlined the labyrinth of follow-up appointments, the critical emergency protocols we now needed to commit to memory, and the intricate architecture of our future safety planning. It was a bureaucratic ballet of recovery. Then came the chilling pronouncement, delivered with dispassionate clarity. Once released on bail, Jade will not be permitted within a specified distance of you. A restraining order is already being processed. The cold, legalistic terminology hung in the air, thick and oppressive. It felt utterly surreal, as if we were dissecting the actions of a dangerous stranger, a distant threat, rather than grappling with the reality that these words, these strictures, applied to my own flesh and blood, my sister. That afternoon, a beacon of neighborly warmth arrived in the form of Mrs. Buford, her familiar, comforting presence filling the room. In her hands, carefully swaddled in a checkered tea towel, was a thermos of her renowned homemade chicken noodle soup, its fragrant steam already hinting at restorative power. Oh, she'd been cooking all morning, Mrs. Buford explained softly, her gaze a little unfocused. Just needed something, anything, to do with my hands, you know. Her words were an unspoken acknowledgement of the shared grief and helplessness that hung heavy in the air, a common human response to shock. She settled into a chair beside my mother, a silent, comforting anchor. While I carefully sipped the nourishing broth, feeling its warmth spread through me, the two women sat together, not a word exchanged. Yet, in that profound, shared silence, a powerful current of understanding and comfort flowed between them, a quiet testament to enduring friendship and empathy. As she prepared to leave, a small, polished brass key materialized in her hand. Please, she urged my mom, her voice earnest. Take this. It's a spare for our house. For any emergency, anytime, day or night. It was more than a key. It was a promise, a tangible extension of her unwavering support. Just as one source of warmth departed, another, cooler reality arrived. The insurance coordinator, a personification of corporate efficiency, entered bearing a formidable stack of paperwork, thick packets filled with legal jargon and intricate clauses. Amidst the bewildering array of forms, one piece of information offered a sliver of relief: the destroyed insulin, its loss a direct consequence of the recent chaos, would indeed be covered under our policy's emergency replacement clause, a small victory, yet a reminder of the financial toll. With professional precision, she guided us through the dizzying maze of documents, her finger tracing lines of print as she meticulously explained the coverage parameters for my extended hospital stay and the subsequent regimen of follow-up care. Every detail, every copay, every deductible was laid bare. Then, my father, his voice a carefully modulated monotone, utterly devoid of inflection, interjected with a crucial question. Does this coverage extend to counseling services? His neutrality was a thin veneer, barely concealing the seismic emotional shifts and the unspoken trauma that had now irrevocably altered the landscape of our family. My old insulin pump, the constant companion that had once felt like an extension of my own body, was deemed irreparable, a casualty of the recent trauma. Its replacement wasn't merely a medical necessity. It felt like a symbolic severing, a tangible break from the before times. A compassionate diabetes educator, her movements deliberate and calming, arrived with a sleek, brand new pump. She meticulously guided me through the intricate setup process, her voice a steady anchor amidst my inner turmoil, demonstrating each step with reassuring clarity. When it was my turn to prime the delicate tubing, to meticulously fill it with insulin, my hands betrayed me. They trembled uncontrollably, a vivid physical manifestation of the lingering shock. It was as if my well-honed muscle memory, years of routine, was engaged in a desperate, silent battle against the fresh, searing imprint of trauma, fighting to reassert normalcy. Understanding the profound struggle unfolding within me, she remained extraordinarily patient, allowing me to navigate each precise, delicate step at my own halting, uncertain pace, offering encouragement rather than instruction. As dusk draped the hospital in soft, purple hues, the parade of visitors continued, each arrival a fresh wave of emotional exhaustion. Then, a whirlwind of familiar energy, my Aunt Clara, a force of nature, arrived. She had driven relentlessly for hours, crossing to state lines, abandoning her life the moment Mom's frantic call had reached her. Her face, pitched with worrying and fatigue, spoke volumes of her hurried journey. She enveloped me in a tender embrace, her hug exquisitely careful, acutely aware of the delicate four-line tethering me to the pole. But when she finally released me and turned to face my parents, her posture stiffened, and her expression hardened. The gentleness she'd shown me vanished, replaced by a gaze that was far less forgiving. Moments later, from the hallway just beyond my half-closed door, the murmur of voices escalated into sharp, heated whispers. Fragments of their tense conversation, laced with palpable anger and frustration, drifted into my room, enabling Jade all these years, And how could you have ignored the warning signs? The air crackled with unspoken blame. A fresh fissure opening in the strained family dynamic. As the hospital settled into its nocturnal rhythm, the night shift nurses materialized a new pair of faces, calm and efficient, taking over the ceaseless cycle of blood sugar checks and vital sign measurements. The routine, at least, remained a constant, grounding presence. Against all odds, I slept better that night. The sheer physical exhaustion, a pervasive weight pressing down on every cell, had finally managed to subdue the relentless, buzzing anxiety that had held me captive for days. It was a surrender, not a victory, but a welcome respite nonetheless. The nightmares, those insidious replays of terror, still flickered at the edges of my consciousness, but their edges were blurred, their intensity softened. It was as if, even in sleep, my mind had begun the arduous, slow work of carving the overwhelming trauma into smaller, more manageable pieces, finding a way to file away the raw edges of pain. The dawn of the second morning brought with it a tangible promise of freedom, the crisp, official rustle of discharge papers, Dr. Rollins, her expression a careful blend of professionalism and relief, conducted her final, thorough examination. Her pronouncement was music to my ears. You're stable enough for home care. It was an official sanction, a green light to begin the long journey back to something resembling normalcy. Understanding the lingering physiological impact of my ordeal, she meticulously adjusted my insulin ratios once more, carefully accounting for the cortisol and other stress hormones that were undoubtedly still surging and swirling through my system, throwing my delicate balance askew. A series of urgent follow-up appointments were penciled in for the upcoming week, a testament to her commitment to closely monitor my precarious recovery, ensuring no unforeseen complications arose. Then came the discharge nurse, a woman of formidable organizational skills, who embarked on a lengthy, exhaustive checklist. Each item was methodically ticked off, medications verified and counted, the labyrinth of follow-up appointments triple confirmed, emergency contact numbers dutifully updated in a clear, legible hand. Finally, she instructed me to demonstrate the familiar, almost ritualistic process of drawing up insulin and checking my blood sugar. What had always been standard protocol, a mundane part of my daily existence, was suddenly imbued with an entirely new, heavy meaning, a fragile affirmation of my continued self-reliance amidst profound vulnerability. My mother, ever vigilant, absorbed every single one of my movements, her eyes fixed on my hands as if she were meticulously memorizing the entire procedure herself, ready to step in, to assist, to protect at a moment's notice. My father, a silent anchor, had thoughtfully brought a fresh set of clothes from home, a small, yet significant, tether to the world outside these sterile walls. Slipping out of the impersonal hospital gown and into my own familiar clothes felt utterly surreal, a strange, almost alien sensation after today's cocooned in thin, shapeless fabric. My jeans, once a snug fit, now hung noticeably loose, a stark visual testament to the water weight stripped away by the severe dehydration I'd endured. Even the simple, automatic act of bending over to tie my shoelaces left me gasping, a sudden, surprising wave of breathlessness washing over me. It was a sobering reminder of just how profoundly my body was still reeling, still engaged in the silent, arduous battle of recovery from its brutal ordeal. The mandatory wheelchair ride to the main exit was non-negotiable, a firm hospital policy, overriding my weak, mumbled protests about being able to walk. It felt infantilizing, yet also a subtle admission that my strength was not yet what it once was. While my father maneuvered our car to the curb, Mom, with quiet efficiency, gathered the accumulated detritus of my hospital stay, a surprising collection of well wishes and unspoken anxieties. There were vibrant bouquets of flowers from concerned relatives, their cheerful colors a stark contrast to the sterile environment. A stack of get-well cards from neighbors who'd heard the news through the inevitable suburban grapevine. And, most poignantly, a thick packet of untouched pamphlets, their glossy covers promising family counseling resources, a grim foreshadowing of the deeper healing still required. The drive home was enveloped in a heavy, almost suffocating silence, broken only by the low, unobtrusive murmur of the car radio playing some innocuous pop song. The unspoken thoughts, the unvoiced fears, felt louder than any conversation could have been. I sat slumped in the back seat, my gaze fixed on the familiar streets and houses whizzing by, a silent observer in my own life. Outwardly, everything looked precisely the same: the manicured lawns, the familiar mailboxes, the predictable architecture. Yet, everything felt profoundly, unsettlingly different, as if I were a stranger returning to a foreign country, a place I once knew intimately but now viewed through a distorted, fractured lens. My mother, her whirring a palpable aura, couldn't resist. Every few minutes, she'd twist in her seat, craning her neck to check on me, her seatbelt groaning and straining with the effort, a physical manifestation of her unyielding anxiety. Our house, a silent, inanimate witness, looked precisely as we had abandoned it 3 harrowing days prior. It was a frozen tableau, a stark, unsettling contrast to the seismic shifts that had occurred within our lives. The forgotten Black Friday sale flyer still lay casually splayed across the kitchen table, a relic of mundane concerns. Jade's unwashed coffee mug, its contents dried to a sticky ring, stood defiantly in the sink. This utterly banal, mundane normalcy felt not just jarring, but frankly obscene, a perverse insult after the shattering violence that had erupted within these very walls. My father, his jaw set in a hard line, immediately began the grim, almost ritualistic task of systematically purging Jade's lingering presence from the common areas. He moved with a furious, cathartic energy, swiftly gathering her personal belongings, a forgotten book, a stray scarf, a trinket, and stuffing them unceremoniously into cardboard boxes, a silent, Symbolic eviction. I found myself frozen in the kitchen doorway, my feet rooted to the spot, a sudden, insurmountable barrier preventing me from stepping further into the space where so much terror had unfolded. The shards of broken glass had been meticulously swept away, and the sticky, sweet residue of wasted insulin thoroughly mopped from the floor. My mind's eye still vividly replayed the scene. I could see it all, the exact spot on the counter where I had desperately groped for support, the porcelain sink where I had vomited bile and despair, the cold tile floor where my body had finally given out and collapsed. The physical evidence was gone, but the phantom trauma lingered, etched into the very air. Understanding the silent battle raging within me, Mom gently, wordlessly, guided me away from the kitchen's painful memories and steered me towards the relative sanctuary of the living room instead. That very afternoon, a heavy, utilitarian lockbox, ordered with urgent precision, arrived via delivery. Its solid, unyielding presence felt like both a blessing and a grim necessity. My father, channeling his anxiety into action, immediately set about installing it within the cool, quiet confines of my bedroom closet. He didn't just bolt it down, he meticulously affixed an additional combination lock, a redundant layer of security, as if to say, never again, together with a solemn, almost ritualistic care. We transferred my precious insulin supply into its new, fortress-like home, counting each delicate vial not once, but twice, verifying its presence as if each one were a priceless gem. He then recited the combination to me, making me repeat it aloud, and insisted I practice opening the heavy metal door several times, ensuring that I, and I alone, held the key to my own vital medication. My mother, ever the careful guardian, meticulously scribbled the sequence onto a small slip of paper, which she then secreted away deep within her jewelry box, a hidden backup for a future emergency. A tangible sign of her enduring vigilance, my bedroom, once my private haven, now felt like a perplexing paradox, simultaneously a sanctuary, a safe enclosure, and yet, also a suffocating prison. Every familiar object, every framed photograph, was exactly as I had left it, but an insidious, chilling residue of Jade's violated presence still seemed to cling to the air, an invisible, unwelcome guest. It was then, as I sifted through the mundane contents of my desk drawer, that my fingers brushed against something cold and plastic. One of my old glucose meters. It must have been a relic, a forgotten item she'd overlooked in her frantic, destructive search, hidden beneath a pile of old homework. The sight of it, a stark reminder of her invasive violation, sent a violent, uncontrollable tremor through my entire body. I shook, my teeth chattering, a wave of visceral fear washing over me, until my mother, her presence a solid, comforting anchor, wrapped her arms around me, holding me steady until the tremor slowly, reluctantly, subsided. Dinner that night was a desolate affair of takeout, a concession to the emotional and physical exhaustion that had utterly sapped any desire to cook. The kitchen, with its fresh scars, felt unapproachable. We gathered in the living room, a temporary truce, pointedly abandoning the grand dining table, that traditional stage where countless family dramas, both mundane and momentous, had been enacted over the years. It was a silent agreement to avoid another painful performance. The food, despite its comforting aroma, tasted like cardboard in my mouth, bland and unappealing. Yet, I forced each bite down, a disciplined act, acutely aware that my blood sugar, still precarious, desperately needed the stability that sustenance provided. My father, his brow furrowed with a new, almost obsessive intensity, meticulously scrutinized the nutrition information on every container, calculating carb counts with a precision he hadn't exhibited since my initial diagnosis. His whirring was a tangible, silent presence. After dark, the sudden, sharp chime of the doorbell reverberated through the quiet house, shattering the fragile peace. We all froze, every muscle tensing, the innocuous sound triggering a fresh, sickening wave of primal anxiety. Was it her? Had she somehow returned? It was only Mrs. Davison from next door, her face creased with genuine concern, holding out a steaming casserole dish, another unsolicited, yet heartfelt, offering of suburban kindness. My mother, ever the gracious hostess even in turmoil, accepted the dish with a practiced, weary smile, while Dad and I remained conspicuously hidden in the living room, a silent, unspoken barrier between us and the well-meaning world outside. The sheer, almost aggressive normalcy of suburban kindness, those comforting rituals of casseroles and murmured sympathies, felt utterly jarring. A discordant note clashing violently against the raw, jagged edges of our profoundly altered, irrevocably broken new reality. As bedtime approached, a fresh wave of anxieties washed over me, presenting an entirely new set of challenges in the vulnerable quiet of the night. Before I even dared to attempt sleep, I meticulously checked and rechecked my insulin supply not once, not twice, but 3 agonizing times, a compulsive need for reassurance. A desperate attempt to assert control over the one thing that had been so violently taken from me. My mother, her eyes still brimming with worrying, gently offered to stay in my room, a comforting presence, but I, despite the terror, declined. No, Mom, I whispered, I need to face this alone. It was an instinctive understanding that to truly begin the painstaking work of rebuilding my shattered sense of security, to reclaim my autonomy, I had to confront the darkness on my own terms. She understood, in her silent, profound way. Her compromise was a small but significant act of love. Okay, she agreed, but we'll leave both our doors open. I'll listen, honey. Just call out if you need anything at all. It was a thin, auditory thread of connection, a promise of protection that offered a fragile sliver of comfort, Sleep, when it finally arrived, came only in fragmented, elusive snatches. I found myself waking every few hours, not from natural sleep cycles, but driven by a compulsive need to check my blood sugar. This once routine, almost mindless act had now become acutely tinged with a pervasive paranoia, a chilling layer of dread that clung to every thought. Despite each reading consistently flashing back as normal, a calm, reassuring figure on the small digital screen, I invariably found myself performing the test a second time, a third, as if daring the numbers to lie. Was it truly normal, or was I just missing something, some subtle harbinger of disaster? The insulin pump, a constant companion, hummed softly on my nightstand, a low, rhythmic drum that was both intimately familiar and deeply unsettling. Its sound, a symbol of life-sustaining medicine, now felt like a constant, quiet trigger, a reminder of my vulnerability and the recent terror. Morning arrived with a hushed inevitability, Mom already a diligent presence in the kitchen. The soft clatter of pans and the gentle aroma of cooking a stark contrast to the lingering anxieties of the night. She had spent the dark hours meticulously researching low-glycemic recipes, a stack of printouts, and a faintly glowing laptop screen testament to her determined vigil, fueled by an unwavering resolve to help manage my diabetes more effectively to regain some semblance of control. Dad, meanwhile, sat at the dining table, a stark, open notebook before him, his pen scratching furiously as he formulated questions for the lawyer he had finally managed to contact. His brow furrowed in a deep, troubled concentration. The scene, this carefully constructed tableau of a normal family breakfast, felt profoundly forced, an elaborate pretense, yet undeniably necessary. A thin shield against the overwhelming reality we were all navigating. Later, the pharmacy called, a mundane chime that broke the tense silence, confirming my prescription refills were ready for pickup. Mom, her resolve hardening into an almost desperate urgency, insisted on collecting them immediately, even though we had only just received a substantial supply from the hospital. She returned with an armload of bags, rustling and bulging with vials and syringes enough insulin, she declared, to last for a month, perhaps even longer. We carefully added every item to the already growing collection in the lockbox, a heavy metal repository that had become our secure vault. The growing stockpile, a silent testament to our newfound preparedness, offered a strange, tangible comfort, a weighty reassurance against the terror of scarcity. Dr. Rollins's office contacted us, a polite voice confirming my follow-up appointment. The receptionist, her tone subtly infused with an unspoken understanding, mentioned they had allocated extra time to the slot. The implication hung in the air. This visit would delve far beyond the routine diabetes management we were accustomed to. It would be about healing wounds that weren't immediately visible. Mom, ever the meticulous planner, immediately marked it on not one, but 3 different calendars scattered across the house her anxiety, a restless current beneath her composed exterior, manifesting as relentless over-preparation. The afternoon devolved into an obsessive cycle of blood sugar testing. Every slight deviation, every fleeting sensation in my body triggered a fresh wave of panic, a cascade of frantic self-diagnosis. Was this sudden thirst a sign of dangerously high sugar levels, or merely simple dehydration? Did the tremor in my hands herald a terrifying dip in my glucose, or was it merely the lingering phantom of residual trauma, a physical echo of the ordeal? The uncertainty was torment. Finally, in an act of gentle but firm intervention, Mom hid my extra test strips, limiting me to the prescribed checking schedule. A silent acknowledgement that my self-monitoring had spiraled into something unhealthy. Then, the detective called, his voice a steady, grounding presence, offering updates. Jade, he informed us, had made bail, but a palpable sigh of relief escaped me when he added she was staying with a friend across town. The restraining order, a legal shield, was officially in place, offering a thin but vital layer of protection. He emphasized that the prosecutor was taking the case with utmost seriousness, given the life-threatening nature of her actions, a phrase that reverberated with a chilling clarity. Court dates, he assured us, would be scheduled soon. Dinner was another quiet affair, punctuated only by the soft clinking of cutlery and unspoken thoughts. We had already, almost instinctively, developed a new routine, eating our meals in the living room, a conscious effort to avoid the kitchen's lingering memories, its silent echoes of trauma. Dad, ever the pragmatist, had started researching home security systems, his tablet glowing faintly as he scrolled through options, motion sensors, cameras, elaborate alarm systems. His mission was clear, anything, absolutely anything, to restore our shattered sense of safety, to rebuild the walls that had so brutally come down. The counselor, whom Mom had diligently sought out among many, finally called to schedule our first family session. It had been a challenging search, filtering through various practitioners until she found one specializing in the intricate interplay of medical trauma and family dysfunction, a combination that perfectly, painfully described our current state. The initial appointment was set for the following week, a small reprieve, allowing us precious time to process the immediate, raw crisis before plunging into the deeper, more complex issues that undoubtedly lay beneath the surface. Night fell once more, bringing with it its familiar retinue of anxieties. Despite a rational certainty that nothing had changed, I found myself checking the insulin supply twice more, as if the vials might vanish in the darkness. Mom, her meticulousness escalating, had begun a detailed log documenting every single vial's location and its precise expiration date, creating an inventory of our vital resources. Dad, in a gesture that was both heartwarming and unsettling, installed a baby monitor in my room. earnestly insisting it was just temporary, just until things felt normal again. The irony was not lost on me, a baby monitor for a situation that had stripped me of any sense of childlike innocence. The second night home, to my surprise, was marginally better. I woke only twice to check my blood sugars, a noticeable improvement from the previous night's frantic vigilance, and verified my insulin supply only once. During one of my checks, Mom appeared silently in my doorway, a spectral presence in the dim light, wordlessly confirming she was still maintaining her unwavering vigil. We exchanged a brief, understanding nod in the darkness, a silent acknowledgement of our shared burden, our new, unsettling reality. Morning heralded the hesitant beginning of a routine. Breakfast, a blood sugar check, the precise insulin dose, and then the meticulous recording of every detail in the logbook. Mom watched, her gaze attentive, but didn't hover quite as much, a subtle shift that hinted at a fragile return of trust. Dad left for work reluctantly, his farewell prolonged by lingering worrying, calling not once, but twice before lunch to check in, his anxious presence somehow missed. The house, paradoxically, felt emptier without the low thrum of his concern. Driven by an unspoken need, I ventured into the kitchen for the first time since my return. The familiar space, once the bustling heart of our home, now felt oddly foreign, each surface holding invisible memories, echoes of laughter and fear. I found myself standing frozen by the sink, a statue caught between past and present, unable to move either forward or back, trapped in the web of what had happened. Mom, sensing my paralysis, gently guided me through the simple act of making tea, a small, deliberate step, reclaiming the space one quiet action at a time. The mill, a relentless conveyor of reality, brought a fresh wave of medical bills and insurance paperwork, a stark reminder of the financial fallout. Mom sorted through them methodically, her movements precise and determined, creating dedicated files for everything remotely connected to the incident. She had already begun the arduous appeals process for the destroyed insulin, fiercely determined to have Jade's actions meticulously documented in every possible system, leaving no bureaucratic stone unturned. Mrs. Buford, our kind neighbor, stopped by with more food of warm, comforting lasagna, if I recall correctly, and, more importantly, a truly listening ear. She shared stories of her own family struggles, her voice empathetic and wise, normalizing our pain without ever diminishing its intensity. Before leaving, she made us promise, her gaze firm and sincere, to use that spare key she'd given us if we ever needed anything, day or night. Her fierce, almost maternal protectiveness brought Mom to tears again, a release of emotion in the face of such unexpected kindness. The afternoon was dedicated to a meticulous reorganization of my diabetes supplies. We created multiple emergency kits, strategically placing them throughout the house like small, vital caches. Each kit was carefully stocked with glucose tablets, a spare meter, and ketone testing strips. Dad, in his evolving role as a domestic security expert, labeled each one with bright red tape, making them impossible to miss. A stark visual warning. It was almost darkly amusing. Witnessing Dad morph into a security system connoisseur while Mom became a champion of meticulous meal prep and inventory management, a poignant testament to how trauma can compel everyone to suddenly pick up new, unexpected hobbies no one ever asked for. Dr. Rollins's follow-up appointment confirmed that my physical recovery was progressing remarkably well. My blood sugar patterns, she noted with a reassuring smile, were stabilizing, though still occasionally showing stress-related spikes, quiet tremors reflecting the internal turmoil. She adjusted my insulin ratios once more and, to offer an added layer of peace of mind, recommended continuous glucose monitoring. This advanced technology, she explained, would provide constant readings, alerting us to dangerous trends before they became critical, a silent guardian against unseen threats. The drive home, however, was when Mom finally broke down completely. She abruptly pulled the car over to the side of the road, the engine idling softly, and collapsed into gut-wrenching sobs. Her grief poured out, a torrent of guilt and regret about failing to protect me, about unknowingly enabling Jade's destructive behavior, about the thousand small, insidious signs she felt she had ignored. I reached over and held her hand, squeezing it tightly as her tears flowed, a shared moment of raw vulnerability. Both of us were learning, in that quiet, tearful space, that healing would not be a linear path, but would come in unpredictable, overwhelming waves. Dad had dinner waiting when we arrived, a quiet gesture of love, having left work early specifically to cook. He had prepared my favorite childhood meal, a familiar comfort meant to overwrite the kitchen's painful memories with new, positive ones. We ate together at the dining table for the first time since the incident, reclaiming another precious piece of our home, one meal at a time. Evening brought with it a profound exhaustion, but also, paradoxically, a strange, nascent peace. We had survived another day. My blood sugars had remained stable, a small but monumental victory. The insulin, our lifeline, remained safely locked away, its presence a quiet comfort. These seemingly insignificant triumphs felt monumental, each one a testament to our resilience. Mom, sensing the shift, suggested we watch a movie together, something light and distracting, a gentle balm for frayed nerves. Bedtime arrived with notably less anxiety. I checked my supplies only once, a singular, calm verification, and recorded my blood sugar normally, without the previous night's obsessive urgency. Mom, in a tender gesture she hadn't made since I was a little girl, leaned down and softly kissed my forehead goodnight. Dad, ever vigilant, double-checked the new alarm system, a series of reassuring clicks and beeps, before finally retiring for the night. We worked slowly but surely, learning to feel safe again. The night passed peacefully, an undisturbed expansive darkness. I woke only once, more from ingrained habit than any urgent need. My blood sugar was perfect, a steady, reassuring number. My insulin pump hummed steadily, a soft, rhythmic mechanical heartbeat. I lay in the quiet darkness, listening to the familiar, comforting sounds of home, the subtle creaks of the old house, the distant murmur of the refrigerator, and felt something deep inside begin. Ever so gently, to unknot, to unravel, morning dawned.